So, welcome to this, the first summit in alternative education. I'm delighted, absolutely delighted to be asked by Divergent Education Cyprus to chair this, and I hope you really enjoy this session. And we would appreciate any feedback afterwards, whether it's a criticism or a compliment or merely a comment. It would be good to know how this has gone and whether it was useful to you. I'm going to, let me see if I can spotlight myself for a bit. There we go. How's that? So my name's Alison Sauer, and I've been involved in elective home education and alternative education for over 20 years. And I'm currently the chair of a UK national charity called the Centre for Personalised Education. And our job as a charity is to promote and explore alternative education and to criticise the mainstream offer in the light of that alternative education experience, and also other things like psychology, mental health, and other things. So without too much ado, I'm going to hand over to Sean a couple of minutes early for him to do a little talk about the link between economic well-being and education systems that support creativity. Now, Sean is a friend and colleague of mine. He's an innovation strategist specialising in alternative and future forms of education. He was a Cisco Education Fast Forward Fellow, and he's the former senior manager at the UK Design Council, where he led the education team. As a consultant to Innovate UK, he's helped over 100 companies to become more creative. He's a trustee of the Centre of Personalised Education, and he's also an active home educator. So, Sean, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, and a nice introduction there. I have put together some slides to illustrate what I'm going to be talking about. So first thing is I will just see if I can share the screen, and hopefully, if I go with this one, hopefully you can now see a young girl looking across at the title, the link between economic well-being and creative education systems. Is that the case? Thumbs up from Alison if that's the case. Yeah, brilliant. So as Alison has said, I am an innovation strategist, and I work in the area of education, not just the alternative education, but also mainstream. And the question which I'm going to put right at the heart of my talk, and I hope which will serve as a bit of a scene setter, especially if you're wanting to influence policymakers, is, you know, our teaching systems, which are based on conformity, are they capable of producing sufficient numbers of dissenters to support companies who specialize in change and innovation? Bearing in mind that those companies are the ones which are defining the nature of the 21st century. So those are also the companies which are going to have to get us out of the hole called climate change. Are we producing enough people to meet their needs? And what happens when we do support those companies properly with children who've been educated appropriately for the circumstances of the lives that they will lead? So just to double emphasize, this is not going to be about, you know, slagging off schools everywhere in the world. When I was at the Design Council, I worked with a number of people, 350 schools across England, and 12 of them we worked very intensively with. And one of those 12 went on to win UK Head Teacher of the Year due to improvements in the performance of the school. But more important, the main achievement that was made there was an improvement in the atmosphere within the school, more collegiate, cooperative environment in which it became okay to ask questions. And Ian phoned me up one time and he said, you know, I've just sent some children off on work experience and I've had a phone call through from one of the employers. And he said, it's these children. And he went, oh no. He went, yeah, he says, asking all these questions. And he went, oh, I'm really sorry. And he went, no, it's great. He said, this never happened before. We just have children standing there waiting to be shown what to do, looking like they don't want to be there. Your kids are taking a real interest in things, and I like it. So that's the kind of thing that we want to try to produce. And I also want to say that I have a special reason for wanting to do this particular conference. It's because I myself was born in Cyprus. This is a picture of me and my mother and daughter standing outside the first home I ever lived in, which is in Limassol. And it's a taxi firm these days, which made it easy to get back to the hotel afterwards. But, at least gave a wonderful moment for 3 generations right there. Now, bringing it back to the topic under discussion, what is the link between, creative education systems and economic well-being? Well, when I was a senior manager at the Design Council, it coincided with other people there producing a study of what had happened to share prices in the period 1994 to 2004. And in that time, companies which had gained a reputation for being creative or were working in the emerging technologies of that time, they grew by 205% and 248% respectively, compared to 57% that was managed by the FTSE 100 over that same time period. So if you'd bought shares in those companies, you would have more than doubled your money, and especially in comparison to the FTSE 100. What's really interesting about this, though, is that between the period 2000 and 2003, the markets collapsed. And in that time, the FTSE 100 firms lost 41% of their value. Imagine how many billions and billions of pounds were wiped away by that kind of a fall. But in the same period, those creative and emerging technology companies, they actually grew in value, not by as much as normal, but they continued to grow even then. So companies which are creative do very well, and that means that they pay a lot of tax. Now, you might think, well, that was a long time ago, and that was just in the UK. So between 1994 and between 2005 and 2015, the Boston Design Management Institute repeated the study, but they used American companies that were generally very large, companies like Whirlpool and Black & Decker and Disney, and they looked to see how they compared to the banks and Ford and huge companies like that. And look at that, once again, the figure was more than 200%. Creative companies grew more than twice as fast as the other ones. Well, very recently, McKinsey & Co., a company who I do not normally have much time for, did a similar study, but this time they looked at 40,000 companies across 3 continents in 5 different economic sectors. And here what they found was that a company which incorporated design thinkers at board level grew 56% more than companies which didn't. And even the worst performing companies that try to be creative in how they work grew by 15% faster than their immediate competitors. So these are quite staggering returns for shareholders. And even if you then go back to the world of just plain old manufacturing, when Innovate UK, which is the UK's body encouraging innovation, when they give money to companies to try and create a new product or a new service, generally speaking, those companies make 7.3 times as much money as the value of the grant, which means that they pay back more than the cost of the grant in corporation tax. And in the UK, British companies contribute £55 billion a year in corporation tax, and 37 billion of that is directed towards funding our schools in this country. So they ask, the Confederation of British Industries asks just about every single year, it says, we're happy to pay the money, but we need employees who are able to work in our companies, that we don't have to train, that they're not holding us back, they're actually driving us forward. And so it's really important to them to have a supply of children who have not been trained in traditional conformist manners, but have access to different routes of education, different ways of expressing their talents and their skills. And in the UK, some people may have seen this, but the Cambridge University and about 10 other universities have said that they will close their teacher training departments if our government continues in its current trend, which is to enforce more and more conformity at the expense of this dissent, and it's a key word I want to emphasize today. The core enabler for innovation is dissent. It is dissatisfaction with how things are done at the present time. It's a drive to be unconventional. It is the opposite of perpetuation. So schools which are built on a 200-year-old tradition and which push people into old established industries are really standing in the way of innovation. And yet, if we're going to solve problems such as climate change or getting out of all of the debt that our countries are in, we need our companies to find new ways to take us forward. And different countries are trying. I thought I'd take an example here from the other side of the European Union. This is a small island. It's divided. It has approximately 4 million people living in the south part of it. And they have a corporation tax of 12.5%, which just happens to be the same as the one charged in Cyprus, as I understand it. 12.5% means that they are significantly undercutting the rest of the global market. In other words, they're saying to companies, come here because we're cheap. Come here because we will take less tax off you. And even though the advertised rate is 12.5%, companies like Apple end up paying between 2.2 and 4.5%, hardly anything. And as a result of that, Apple, a single company, is now contributing 20% of Irish GDP. But Ireland cannot supply the employees that are needed to keep Apple happy. Even though Ireland has become the best at producing STEM graduates, at science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, they're still only producing 30 for every 1,000 students that go to university. So there's no way that they can meet Apple's needs. So consequently, Ireland has become a venue in which large numbers of people born overseas relocate in order to do work for Apple, and Apple pays no tax or very little tax. And in fact, hardly any invention is happening in Ireland. All that's really happening is that patents, which are being created anywhere in the world, are being registered in Ireland so that all of the profits related to it can go through this low tax funnel. And when Donald Trump in 2018 said, I'm offering an amnesty to American companies, they can bring their money back at a specially reduced tax rate, Apple took $350 billion and brought it back into the United States. So there's no sentimentality involved here. Now, Ireland is, as you can imagine, is a country that is steeped in traditional learning, and it does not a great deal in terms of inventiveness. So it is severely at risk when a company like Apple does that. And unless it can drive up the number of homegrown engineers, it's going to rely on foreign workers coming in and then taking their salaries abroad again with them when they leave. So what kind of things can we do about that? Well, diversity of education means producing more STEM graduates, but that also means female STEM graduates. And I was very pleased to do this project some time ago. I created a robotics laboratory in a school that was built around the top 5 job hire skills. What are they? Team working, problem solving, communication skills, interpersonal skills, which we could call intergenerational, and honesty and integrity. And yet we know that in our schools, children work on their own, so there's not a lot of team working. They're shown how to do things and then tested on their ability to replicate. And that's very different to problem solving. They are generally required to work in silence. That affects their communication skills. They mix in single year groups, so the intergenerational thing is badly affected. And most of all, children in our schools are fundamentally distrusted, so they can't display the honesty and integrity. Well, these young ladies here, when they saw the Robotics Laboratory, they gave up their dance class and got interested in robotics. They won the UK National Championships. They went to the World Championships. And when they got there, they found that out of 700 teams, they were the only all-female team. So there's a clear problem in terms of how we present robotics and engineering to our students if only one team out of 700 around the world is entirely female. But Cyprus, is on the corner of the Middle East, and countries all across there are trying to wrestle with climate change. We see Qatar, for instance, looking at its own future. They're going to lose 1/10 of their land base due to rising sea levels. The inner part of Qatar is going to become so hot and humid that it will be impossible for humans to live there. And as a result, they're thinking, how do we transition from an oil economy? How do we stop having to buy in expertise from elsewhere? How are we going to solve our own problems? And the answer is through their schools. Students in Qatar are now being asked to deal with questions that are directly related to the future of the country. And they want to build a skill set so that they can pay their own way in future without having to buy in services from abroad. And it completely changes how learning happens. When you're engaged in real life science, when you're looking at the interplay between nature and technology and humanity, if you then go on to become a leader in society, you have a better chance of solving the problem than somebody who simply studied ancient Greek, as our Prime Minister did. And in China, they are actually teaching dissent. It's a communist country. You're generally supposed to do what you're told, but they've realized that if people just do what they're told and wait to be told what to do, then it creates a wonderful country in terms of being the workforce of the world. But to be the inventors for the world is a completely different question. That only comes if people are challenging the orthodoxy. And so they have been training children in their education system to become more questioning and challenging of each other while remaining loyal. And of course, the methods, I'm leaving that to other people to talk about. So what I'm trying to say ultimately is that a country like Cyprus, which is relying on providing services very cheaply, which is heavily in debt, which doesn't have a large population, doesn't have much in the way of natural resources. Even Greek is a language that's not spoken widely around the world compared to English or Chinese. They need to figure out what to do. One option is to copy Ireland, right? Keep that low corporate tax rate, invite people to come in, let them take their revenue abroad when they decide to pull out, and develop very, very slowly and in terror of your neighbors. Or you could be like Denmark, another country which has got a small population. It has a language that very few people speak. It has very little natural resources. But through their sheer inventiveness, they've grown to be the most inventive country in Europe. And the money that they're making means that they are a net profit maker as a country, and they've used their money to go into banking. So they are now a lender rather than a borrower. So in the end, what we're looking at here is the proposition that if we stick with an orthodox education in which everybody is taught the same thing in the same way with an expectation of obedience, then you're just going to see stagnation and a race to the bottom. Alternatively, if you take a leaf out of countries like Singapore and Denmark, you can diversify that education approach so that your employees, native-born employees, become attractive to some of the highest growth companies in the world. And they will drive those companies forward. So my question to you as I finish this talk is, what color do you think Cyprus will be going forward? Will it be one of the red ones, one of the yellow ones, or one of the purple ones that's basically flatline? Thank you very much for your patience, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you very much, Sean. That was really, really interesting. Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
I thought I had. Oh,
no.
Screen sharing. Pause. There it is.
There it is. Well done.
Okay.
Well done. Hi, Jerry. Nice to see you. We'll be along to you when it's time. Okay, so we are now on with, let me do the spotlight thing again. I'll get the hang of this by the time we've finished. It'd be fine. It'd be fine. Replace. There we go. That's me. Okay, so we are on to Harriet now. Sean's overrun a little bit, so we'll but I've got a little bit of slippage space in here, so we'll get on with it. So Harriet, Dr. Harriet Patterson, who was on UK national radio this morning, just to frighten her to death. Dr. Harriet Patterson, she's a senior lecturer in early childhood at Liverpool Hope University. Harriet and I have known each other for 16 years now, ever since she interviewed me for one of her books. And she's a researcher in home education for over 20 years and an erstwhile home educator herself. She's interested in a range of home education issues, including philosophy, pedagogy, and policy, and she's perennially wedded to the cause of meaningful, fulfilling, and happy education. Off you go.
Thank you. So do I get to share screen?
Yes, off you go. It's fine.
There we go, I think.
Yeah, that's it. Well done.
Lovely. Okay, I haven't got quite as many slides as Sean. Yeah, thank you very much, Alison. So here's a little bit about me, most of which Alison's just said, I think. But the most important thing on that slide, I think, is my email address. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, wants to talk about, I'm going to talk about learning to read at home, which is my big passionate subject. And if anybody wants to ask me anything that we don't manage to fit in tonight, or wants to talk about the research or learning to read, do please feel very free to get in touch with me. I'm always happy to hear from people. So as I say, I'm going to talk about learning to read, which I like to talk about a lot. Obviously, learning to read is a really important step in most children's education, and certainly in the UK, there's an awful lot of emphasis put on learning to read. But it's not just interesting in its own sake, because I think learning to read actually makes a really good illustration of how learning can and does work and what the learning possibilities are in home education in a more general sense. So I'm just going to talk about some of those and then turn to the reading as an illustration of the more general points. So we start from this sort of really kind of basic beginning, common sense beginning, that all children are unique. No two children are the same. And that's something that in the UK, we pay a lot of lip service to that idea, particularly in the early years, about the idea that children are unique. And then we go ahead and feed these unique children into a standardized system. Home education is much more logical in the sense that that recognition of unique children feeds into unique learning. No two learning paths are the same, just as no two children are the same. So when you're looking at home education and the way that learning happens in home education and learning trajectories in home education, the first sort of really noticeable point is that they are incredibly diverse. We're looking at so much diversity, so much in terms of multiple pathways. Comparisons don't happen very easily in home education. Instead, you need to be kind of inside that unique child's world, inside their situation, inside them, to see how their pathway of learning unfolds. And that kind of, that level of diversity and that embracing of uniqueness, I have been really astounded by the way that home educators that I have met and amongst whom I've done my research, how able they are to embrace that uniqueness, incredibly flexible, flexible about how they go about learning, about their learning aims, about the resources that they use, about the way that they work with their children, flexible in terms of, you know, if one thing's not working, they're very prepared to give it up and look for a different pathway, and very much embracing the idea of learning unfolding as they go along. Another thing that I think is really notable about home education learning is time. So in formal education, tend to use time as a kind of a benchmark, can be very explicit about, for example, you know, what a 7-year-old ought to be doing. How many years does it take for a person to learn to read? Oh, it takes about 3 or 4. If you want to sit GCSEs, public examinations, you need to start the syllabus 2 years out from the exam. So we use time a lot as a sort of a measurement of learning. And that's something else that doesn't work very well in home education. In home education, sometimes things can happen very, very fast. Sometimes they can be spread out over very long periods of time. Sometimes things start and then they stop, and then maybe they go backwards a bit and then they start again. We have a kind of a stop and go or an up and down learning trajectory. So it's very, very difficult to use time as a kind of a benchmark in the way that it's used in formal education. And something else that has really kind of struck me over the years of looking at home education is the idea of simplicity. And learning to read, I think, is a really good example of this, because in the narrative of how children learn to read that operates in UK schools, learning to read comes over as a very complicated skill that involves learning all sorts of sub-skills and sub-abilities, and being able to bring those together in particular ways in order for children to be able to read. And it seems very, very complicated. And I don't think that just applies to learning to read. Lots of the ways in which we break down learning seem to overcomplicate them. And one of the things that I really enjoy about looking at her, that it often seems to be incredibly simple compared to. So I'll take some now in thinking about the reading research which I did. So this was an international study. We had children from the UK, from Europe, from the USA, from Australia and New Zealand. I don't think we had any Cypriot children, but there were 400 of them altogether. And it was qualitative research, because what I really wanted to do was look at the inside experience of how children at home learn to read. And this is the cover of the book. The research is published as a book that is available if you want to sort of find out more about the research. And the main findings of the research really kind of mirrored the things that I've just said that I feel mark out home education learning more generally. So the first one of these was that there was no common method. And again, in formal education, in UK schools, we have one narrative about how children learn to read. They learn to read through synthetic phonics. And that is the one method, the one way in which reading is presented to them, and the one understanding of their learning that we have. The home education research really confounded that, because for sure there were families who used synthetic phonics and there were families who used other versions of phonics, but there were also families who said things like, don't touch phonics, our children couldn't stand phonics, phonics is really confusing, don't go near phonics. And those families had used maybe other methods, a variety of whole word approaches, or there were other families who'd sort of gone for a kind of pick and mix method, where they'd chosen some things from phonics and some things from a whole word approach, and they had mixed those things up as it suited them as they went along. There were other families who didn't really fix on any kind of standardized or recognized method, but they'd somehow worked out methods of their own. And there were other families who said, well, you know, we didn't really use a method at all. We didn't think in terms of a method. And alongside that diversity, there was no common approach. And by that, I mean, there was no common way in which home educators went about approaching learning to read. So there were some families who were quite structured and who started on a reading program and followed the reading program through. And that included families who started really early. There was one family who put the alphabet chart up over the baby's cot when she was 6 months old. There were other families who were very laid back and relied on a more child-led, emergent approach to reading. There were families who thought they would do it one way and then found that something happened and they ended up doing it another way. So, for example, some parents said, well, we didn't really intend to teach them to read, but then he came to me and said, would I help him? So, you know, obviously I did, and found themselves going through a more structured reading kind of process at the child's behest. And there were other families where the parents thought, you know, really want to help teach my child to learn to read, and then found that teaching rejected. So there was no common approach. And out of the mixture of those two things, no common method and no common approach, there was no such thing as a common reading trajectory. There was no common pathway through reading. It wasn't as if all the children went through similar milestones, but sort of went through them at different ages or at different points, or you know, or even using different methods. That commonality just didn't exist. What did exist was obviously loads of variation, this incredibly flexible response from parents and families and from children themselves. You know, if one thing didn't work, you know, that's okay, go and try something else. Maybe put reading down and go off and do some different things for a few months, for a couple of years, come back to it when you feel like it. So loads of flexibility in that. Lots of individualization and picking up on the things that Sean has been talking about. So much creativity on the part of children, creativity on the part of parents, but also in making use of emergent situations, of making use of things that nobody had predicted, but which just seemed to kind of happen. And I'm going to finish off with a couple of little stories about learning to read, where that becomes really. And the other thing that was common across the cohort was a kind of disruption, or maybe Sean would call it dissent, about the teaching and learning roles that we commonly understand education through. The idea of a teacher who knows the subject matter and knows how to teach the subject matter, delivering that to the students. And those kind of relationships, they didn't really exist in home education. Instead, there was a lot more negotiation. That was a huge part of the flexibility. And there was a lot more agency on the part of children. And again, linking back to Sean, sometimes that agency came over very strongly as dissent, with children saying, you know, I'm not doing that, or I'm not doing that in this way, or I'm not doing that at this time. There was also a lot of agency on the part of parents, though. It wasn't as if children were sort of controlling parents and telling them what they could or couldn't do. Parents were also saying, I find this acceptable, or we want to do it like this, or the way that our family operates. So those kind of things played into a negotiation about how learning was going to happen and what was going to happen in terms of learning to read. And all of that kind of mixed together to form an emergent philosophy, which I suppose I would sum up as being a flexible response to the individual child. And as I said, you know, in terms of a more general point, there was no temporal, this was an atemporal process. It was a process in which time didn't seem to matter very much. Some children learned to read very young. The youngest one in the cohort was 18 months old when her parents said she could recognize logos. They counted that as reading, and I don't see why that shouldn't count as reading. And the oldest child to come to independent reading was 16 years old. So there was no temporal pinning down of this process. So they were the main findings. And just to finish off now and to illustrate those, and to tell two stories. And this research, it was amazing to do because it was packed full of really personal, really interesting stories. Everybody had a story about learning to read, and it was absolutely fascinating listening to them all. But two stories I'd like to share tonight. The first one is about a little boy who learnt to read through his love of singing. And his dad explained this story to me. There were he had two sons, two little boys, and they were really into this children's singing group called the Wiggles. And they loved watching the Wiggles videos, and they loved singing along and dancing along to the Wiggles videos. They knew all the words of the songs, they knew all the tunes. One day, one of the boys said to his dad, could his dad write out the words for the song for him so that he had the words? This was a child who wasn't reading. So his dad, and again, I think this is an illustration of the way that parents responded to children. His dad typed up the words of the song as his son had asked him to, put them in a folder for him and gave them to the little boy, who took them away, sat down with them, sat down with his tapes. He knew the words already. He was listening to the music on the songs, and all he had to do was to work out the one-to-one correlation between the words of the song that he already knew and the words that were written on the page. And that was how he learned to read. He went through that matching process and then was able to take that away and apply that to other things as well. So it was a really great story of how reading emerged out of other interests, how it was picked up, how parents responded to it, and how that led to such an individualized and creative way for him to learn. And the other story, quite different story that I would like to share, but which I also think very much illustrates some of the power in home education and some of the ways in which home education can rise to educational questions that more formal education really, really struggles with. And this is a story of a girl who was in school. She was in school and things were going incredibly badly for her. Her parents decided that she needed to come out of school and be home educated. She was 8 years old. Amongst the things that had gone really badly for her was reading. And when she came out of school, her mum said she couldn't read at all, to the point where she couldn't even recognise her own name. She'd been diagnosed with a whole bunch of special educational needs, and she was also very traumatised by the very upsetting experiences, including reading, that she had had in school. So when she came out of school, her parents said they couldn't start addressing things like reading. They needed to put all of that stuff down and go away and further her education in different ways, in ways that really took the pressure off her. And certainly reading was something that they didn't feel that they could approach at all at that time. And that went on for quite a few years. And it was when she got to 14, she started to read. Her mum noticed that she was starting to read. She wasn't taught to read. She started to work it out for herself. And she worked it out for herself incredibly quickly, to the extent that by the time she was 18, she was ready to go to college and study music. And again, that was a great passion of hers. But she had transformed herself from somebody who had been unable to read, who had been put in the bottom 3% of children in the country. And not only had she got to the stage where she could go on to college and study, but she was also reading novels for pleasure. And that is an incredible success story, because in our education system, you know, if you are in the bottom 3% at 8 years old and you are not reading, your educational outlook is a very, very bleak one. And I think that, and that's not a unique story, that was not a unique story about children coming out of school and being able to learn to read in the home education environment in ways that they hadn't been able to do in school. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. And as I say, I'm really happy to talk about these things at any point tonight or later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. Could you stop screen sharing? That would be terrific. That's great. You've done it. You've done it. Right, okay, moving swiftly on because we're about 10 minutes over now. I'm going to move over to Jo Merritt. Now, Jo is a researcher at Exeter University. She's a researcher in elective home education. She's become quite prominent in the UK recently because she's been so involved with lots of government schemes and things like that. She's been very vocal. She's done the most uncomfortable thing she can possibly do, which is to appear on the media, which is not her thing. In fact, we met on Radio 4 and National Radio on a Radio 4 programme last year, and we've been working together ever since. So, Jo, from Exeter University, from the Centre of Social Mobility, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Here we go. All right, should pop up with the right screen any second.
Yep, that's right.
Oh, didn't like that. Hang on a second. Okay. All right, that should do it now. Let's see what happens. Yeah, as Alison said, I'll start talking now anyway, while I sort the slides out. I am a researcher studying home education for the last 2 years. And I'm lying, I'm not going to talk at the same time. Okay. There we go. All right, let's see if this works this time. We've heard from Sean about the country benefits to home education and the type of learning that happens, and some great examples of how home education can be different from Harriet. And I'm now going to talk to you about the benefits of home education. So as part of our research, one of the questions, we did a survey and interviews, and so far I've spoken to over 1,000 home educators in the UK about home education. And the benefits that home educators talk about are the same benefits we see from research worldwide around home education. So we see parents talking about benefits as having a close relationship with their child. We see families talking about enjoying a hands-on education. Families tell us that their children seem happier than they were when they were at school. That home education gives children a chance to learn at their own pace. And parents tell us that children have a longer time for childhood, so they don't have the same peer pressure as they might do at school to grow up quickly. And parents tell us that that means they have a longer time being a child. Families say that education, when they do home education, is child-led, and that means children get to tend to do what they're interested in, and that leads to a much deeper understanding of the topics that they're interested in. So there were some really, also families told us that they felt they had a better quality of life, and they weren't restricted to the time frame of school, and that freedom to do other things during the day rather than having a school style structure actually gave them the freedom to do education outside of the home. So going to enrich their education with trips to the museum or a place of interest. And for some, that also just meant more time with other family members. So I think a really important question is, does the research back up what the parents were telling us were benefits of home education? And what we've found, and there were echoes of this in both Harriet and Sean's talk, is that the research on home education tells us that home education does actually allow for a range of creative learning opportunities, and a range of different learning materials, sometimes more than you might get in a particular school. That children's rate of learning was very individual, so they weren't confined, as Harriet talked about in her presentation, that children weren't confined to learn something that was deemed appropriate for their age. For some subjects, they might be a little behind that if they've not got a particular interest. And for other subjects where they did have an interest, children tended to accelerate in their learning. There was another study by Lowe and Thomas and Youssef who looked at approaches to home education. And they found that less formal approaches to education, particularly in the early years, tended to lead to a more creative thinking within children, and also better problem-solving skills in maths and other subjects. And home education, both in the UK and America, over the last 30 years, has actually shown us that home-educated children, even when they do unstructured learning and don't follow a school curriculum or school timetable, they still tend to do better than their schooled peers, both at public and private school, when they're home educated, and their test scores tend to be at least a year above their age. The aim of a good teacher should be to make themselves redundant, and by that, what we see in the research is that the aim often of education is to enable children to become independent learners, and we see that emphasis, especially when it comes to universities, that the ideal situation for a learner is for them to be an independent, self-motivated learner. And actually what some of the research shows is that does tend to happen in home education because of the flexibility, the creativity, and the freedom to learn what they're interested in. And there's a whole plethora of other research that supports how home education can be incredibly beneficial for children. And some of that research actually talks about self-directed learning, the fact that there's more time to play, which was one of the benefits parents talked about. There was more time to play that led to more creativity, more better abilities to problem solve, and children became more aware and in control of their physical and mental activities, which actually helped them become more self-regulating. And that meant that they were self-regulating in that they were less intellectually and emotionally reliant on adult support, so they were better able to manage themselves. And there was a growing number of research that also encourages play in the early years and in primary age children, so under 12. Although play is important at any age, that when children have longer times to play, actually that's one of our most powerful predictors for children's development as learners later on. Other research tells us that it's the quality of learning in the home environment, regardless of where they're educated, school or home education, and that actually this learning home environment is more important for a child's intellectual and social development than a parent's occupation or a parent's level of education or even the parent's income. And Sylvia in her study said that what parents do with their children is actually more important than who parents are. And one of the things a lot of research comments on, as so does Colin, Seeley Brown, Newman, and Riley, they all talk about how in home education, parents act as a facilitator to their child's education and not a teacher. And that actually translates as parents actually teaching their children how to learn and supporting them how to learn and study rather than trying to be their teacher. So very briefly, this is just a short summary of the benefits that parents told us. And we again see this flexibility, longer childhood, freedom. Lots of parents commented that there was no bullying in home education when their child had come out of school because of bullying. Lots of families said they preferred a later start to school. So not all families stayed in home education. Some just wanted a later start to their school education. And there's a number of different approaches that we see in home education, which is part of what makes home education so beneficial for children, is there is not one way to do it. And I've listed a number of approaches to home education that parents in the UK talked about. Really what this means is that the parents are able to choose the way that they educate their children when they home educate in a way that suits both the family and the child as a learner. My presentation is just short and sweet, but I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Jo. That was really, really great. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so let's have a look. Now then, we are going to go on to Artemis. Artemis, hello. Hi.
Hi, hello.
Hi. Right. Okay. So Artemis is she is an advocate for children's rights, transformative justice, and many other things. They're a parent, home educator, registered childminder, forest school leader, qualified teacher, an all-round good bod, really. They founded the Garden in Bristol as a place to foment curiosity, promote freedom and nurture community. And they're also currently leading the Freedom to Learn project for Phoenix Education, which is an interesting organisation in the UK that advocates for democratic and self-led learning. Over to you, Artemis.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, Alison. I was going to introduce myself, but obviously you just said everything I needed to say, really. I've also just launched a second learning community this week, actually. So we've just started a new learning community exclusively for 10+. Yeah, my work with Phoenix is in supporting other learning communities as well. So that's a really important part. So I'm here to talk about self-directed learning communities in the UK. I don't have a presentation, so you're just going to have to look at my face, I'm afraid. So I want to tell you my story about how I came to start a learning community, because I was always intended to be a home educator. That was what I felt very passionately was right for my children. And I very much enjoyed the home education community, but I felt like I wanted something more for them. I wanted them to be able to connect with other young people without necessarily having to go to an activity. I wanted them to have space to work on things that were of their own design, but have a solid community, which is something that schools do very well, which is create community. And whilst there was a very strong home education community where I live, in the city I live, which is Bristol in the UK, it felt a bit disparate and a bit sort of spread out, and there was almost too much home education. So I decided I wanted to start something here where my children could build this kind of community. And I looked around for what was already happening, and there were a few projects quite local to me, actually. There were 2 projects that supported me to set the garden up, and they were running what they called at the time, well, actually I don't think they'd called themselves learning communities. I think we were more sort of democratic communities is what they were usually referred to, because the inspiration came from the democratic schools movement, which has a long history in this country. Summerhill is about to celebrate its centenary because it's been around for 100 years now. So, and the inspiration was to create a democratic culture, a different sort of culture for the young people. And so, yeah, I decided to see if anyone else would like to get involved. And fortunately, lots of people did. So we started a learning community in 2015. And since then, it's exploded, and now there are many learning communities all over the UK. So it's a really fast-growing movement of people who don't want to choose school because there's something about school that doesn't work for their family. But also pure home education on its own is not also something that doesn't work for their family for a variety of reasons, and I'll go into that a bit later. But I suppose you probably want to know a bit about what happens at learning communities. So all of the young people are legally home educated. They're usually about 15 hours a week. And one of the key features is that young people have an equal say to the adults in almost everything. There are some limits. Obviously, the law of the land is one, and also elements of safety, health and safety is also another one that comes under the domain of the adults. But in most things, particularly in terms of their learning, they have an equal say to the adults around them. So they decide what, how, and when they learn. And so, because we don't teach anything explicitly, so unless we are asked to teach, because sometimes teaching does happen, but it has to be requested by the young people. There's sort of other ways of doing it. And the lovely thing about this movement is that all of the learning communities are unique. So we're not the same. We don't have the same methodology. It's not, and the power of that is it's not dogmatic. We're all doing something that works for our community. We all have individual approaches. But the one thing we do have in common is that we don't have any compulsory lessons. It's usually, so a lot of the learning is usually project-based. So a young person might express an interest in a particular area or a particular subject or a particular thing they want to do. And then all of the learning they want to do is sort of drawn out of that one project. So for example, the example I always really like to give is if a young person decides they want to make paper aeroplanes, they're making paper aeroplanes, but simply by making paper aeroplanes, they're not just doing that one thing. They're also learning about design engineering. They're also learning about forces. They're doing a lot of physics involved, and they might take that on further to go into more depth if there's something that really catches their interest. So the skill of the facilitator or mentor at a learning community is to really understand the young people and make a connection with them and understand where their interests lie and where that potential is for them to develop their own interests. All of the learning communities that I know of hold community meetings, usually daily, but not always. And those meetings are very much based on the democratic meetings at democratic schools. What happens is that a lot of us make decisions by consensus, though some people use voting. So there's a differentiation there between democratic and sociocratic. So democratic is where you vote, and sociocratic is where you make decisions by consensus. We are sociocratic. We called ourselves democratic for a long time, and then realised that actually we are in fact sociocratic. And that's a big debate within the network. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just what works for each particular community. And the power of making decisions in a democratic or sociocratic way is that you get to, if you're in control of making decisions for yourself, then you have ownership over them. And so if you're making the rules, which we call agreements because they are flexible and they're not hierarchical, if you are making the rules for yourself as a community, you are far more likely to be engaged with them and follow them because you were involved in making them. And even if you disagreed with the creation of a rule, you actually consented to that rule being made because you understood it was for the benefit of the community. So there's a huge power in making those decisions collectively, even if not everybody gets exactly what they want all the time. And it's astonishing just how flexible and adaptable and accommodating and compromising young people are. And to be honest, in my experience, quite considerably more than adults a lot of the time, and I think that's because they're not indoctrinated in a very sort of hierarchical and adversarial culture, which is really very inspiring. Some communities have committees, so particularly the larger settings, they will have committees to make decisions. So they might have a committee to decide on how a budget is spent, on what kind of resources they want to spend the money on. And others have judicial committees. So if there is any conflict in the community, then a judicial committee will decide on what happens with that. In terms of our legality, we don't really exist as legal entities. So we're not schools, but we're also not childcare either, though some of us are registered as childcare. We're not illegal, but we are always precarious because we don't have a legal designation. There's lots of talk at the moment in the press about illegal schools and giving our regulator in the UK, Ofsted, more powers. However, the regulator does already have a lot of powers, and despite having inspected several hundred settings, there have only been 4 prosecutions, and most of those were for very serious, infractions of health and safety. And they're actually as Alison has very rightly pointed out, we are actually unregistered legal settings, not illegal settings. But I'm really pleased to say, on the cusp of legitimacy, which is really fantastic. So we've formed an alliance called the Learning Communities Alliance to have a strong collective voice and to ensure that we aren't at the mercy of the press and political whim, which is always a problem. And also to develop our standards and make sure that we all have some measure of best practice. So we have a really strong support network. We are all in touch with each other and we meet monthly on Zoom. And that's facilitated by Phoenix, which is the charity that I work for under the Freedom to Learn programme.
And I'm lucky to go along to those meetings as well, which is great.
Which we're always very grateful for, Alison. And currently we are putting in a funding bid. Phoenix is currently putting in a funding bid for to develop a training programme so we can develop our best practice and some standards, which is really fantastic news, and I hope it will move the movement on. So the challenge I see is that we're perceived as being only for the most privileged, which I feel is a bit unfair. So lots of settings, all the settings that I know of have some sort of sliding scale of cost, and lots have subsidised places, hardship funds. The garden is registered as childcare, which means that people can get up to 85% of the cost paid for through government childcare schemes. So, and actually, we find that the majority of our families are low income or single parent families or both. And we find that actually we allow people to home educate who otherwise wouldn't be able to, because they wouldn't be able to work, or they wouldn't have enough time for themselves out if their young people, if their children didn't go somewhere else. So it feels like a bit of an unfair perception in many ways. I'm going to wrap up now, but the huge benefit I see really is that we're providing a really nurturing and inclusive space, and a really expansive place for the young people, where they can really start to understand who they are and where they want to go in life. And the focus on consent and their own rights is really central to that, because when you understand your own rights, then you also learn to respect other people's. And I do think it's a deeply political project. We're really trying to create a different sort of culture and a different sort of society, one that's kinder and fairer. So I think it's really important. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Artemis. And I do apologise to everybody about us running over, but quite frankly, I mean, it's all been really interesting so far, hasn't it? So without further ado, I'm going to pop over to Marios. Hello, Marios. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm sorry about us overrunning, but it's all been so good, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've got you down. Tell me if I've got this wrong. That you're a Cyprus native. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes. And that you studied management, finance, and education in the US and Canada.
Yep.
That you're a board member of the Institute of Directors in Cyprus, and you're involved in the management of professional training worldwide.
Yep. Thank you very much.
There you go. Off you go.
Let me find my screen.
Okay, and if we can try and keep to as short a time as possible, that would be amazing. Thank you so much.
Great. I think you can see my screen now. I'm going to present mode. All right. Okay. So great presentations before me, first of all. So great event so far. Thank you for inviting me as well. I just wanted to say a few things about, I guess, my workspace, my passion, which is professional education and training, and how to make young people more employment ready. I mean, I'm just starting with an issue we are facing, not only in Cyprus, all over Europe, all over the world, which is a big issue we're facing in the workplace with skills gap. In most cases, in the UK, the skills gap in the most recent research is about 40% of workers who do not have the right qualifications or skills or knowledge. In the EU is about the similar percentage, and the same in the US. And for Cyprus, I was looking for statistics for Cyprus. I couldn't find, to be honest, but there is a mismatch on the most recent skills panorama by Zetterfop research, which pretty much shows the mismatch in terms of occupations, surplus of occupations, a shortage of occupations, where we're lacking of professionals, for example, in ICT, financial services, health professionals, higher education, and where we have a surplus of occupation professionals. Why does this skills gap exist? I'll connect the professional education to this in my next slide, but why does the skills gap exist? Because of technology, of course. I mean, technology is changing the way we live, the way we do business, the way it affects how we function in a work. And most of the education programs that are out there do not address the issue of technology. That's at any level. To prepare the graduates in education at large, education is high in a lot of markets, and I'm referencing UK here as per a recent OECD report. Again, there was nothing about Cyprus there. But however, employers are seeing big gaps in terms of basic literacy, numeracy, and IT skills. So still young talent, young graduates are not ready to work and function as expected in the workplace. And also training. In the past, there used to be a straight route. I mean, you finish university and most of the companies had some sort of an orientation, induction, graduate training program, and some sort of a training. most of the companies have abolished those kind of graduate hire training. So you don't get a lot of training when they expect a graduate to be more job ready nowadays. They expect you to go in and perform immediately. Some of the challenges in terms of workplace in general, it's the infrastructures that the companies are setting up now. They don't allow for too much of this train period and upskill their workforce. So this is a thing they're lacking for individuals. The challenge is always that there is always something new to learn. And this is where we come in, but this is where the actual employee, once they join the workforce, the adult who's starting to work, they have to have a path and they have to make it a lifestyle that I'm actually working, but at the same time, I'm keep learning and keep being educated so I can keep having a good career path. Now, in terms of professional qualifications, the things we do, I mean, professional qualifications, vocational training, I mean, this is a definite solution for young people who are graduates of high school, I mean, or universities, or anyone in the workforce who's even at an older stage or further down their career, they want to reskill, retrain, learn something different. Pretty much in every profession, for every profession, there are relevant professional qualifications. Then definition pretty much of professional qualification is that the professional qualifications is pretty much an attestation on an individual's level of knowledge or proficiency in a certain industry or profession. Most of these professional qualifications are usually managed by either professional bodies or associations, in some cases government bodies as well, or local development authorities. But the good thing about professional qualifications, again, they are usually easier to complete. Faster to complete in a shorter period of time, let's say, and they're specific to a job profession. The other good thing about professional qualifications, which I like a lot, is the fact that in deciding to do a professional qualification, for example, if a young person decides to become an auditor, they don't really need to go to university. They can start with a basic bookkeeping qualification, move to an accounting technician qualification, and then they can become an auditor. Now, in this scenario, for example, a younger person can start working immediately as well, because when they're doing their bookkeeping qualifications, they can start working as well as a bookkeeper, move into a financial planning position later in their career, at the same time complete their technician qualification, and then move onwards to become an auditor, chartered accountant. In qualification settings, the nice thing is that a lot of the content you're taught is most of the times updated and reviewed every 2-3 years, which is very difficult to do in terms of academic university settings, change the whole academic degree. In professional qualifications, the bodies that usually prepare the qualifications, they will have an expiration date, let's say. So the syllabus, the content will be for 2-3 years, and then it will be reviewed and remade based on current professional challenges of the said profession or job. Okay, I think I've said all of these actually. And also another good thing with professional qualifications is the fact that most of the professional bodies that we work with, and that's pretty much most of the ones that are in UK and Europe, they require their members or the graduates, the ones who get their certificates from the professional body, to also show proof of continuous professional development. So taking a qualification is not the end, is a start, because it's a beginning, because every year you will need to complete some CPD units, some credits, to prove that you're up to date and you are still at the same level as when you did your qualification 2-3 years ago. Several fields that professional qualifications are usually known in: aviation, construction, legal, technology, environment, healthcare, business, real estate, finance, and others. Pretty much there are professional qualifications for almost every profession. Some of the benefits, let me see, actually some examples, further examples to the one I showed earlier. Actually, I mean, you can complete an HR qualification, a management leadership qualification, etc. The fact that, as I said earlier, you can broaden your career opportunities within a shorter period of a targeted learning. So even if you have graduated from a university or not, but even if you're mid-career, you have changed jobs, or you want to change job, you can still opt into a professional qualification, complete it in a shorter period of time, and then get the necessary knowledge to find a new job or change careers. Now, the reasons why employers like the professional qualifications as well is that a lot of times professional qualifications show a commitment in a sector and a profession. It's not so generic as an academic degree, and it shows a commitment that you are pretty much committing in your profession of, let's say, compliance job or an accountant or a risk professional. At the same time, there is also a same kind of knowledge base that, for example, if somebody is graduating from IRM, the Institute of Risk Managers in the UK, and they have their certificates as risk managers, and they work for a bank in the city, and somebody's in Cyprus graduating for the same institute and works for a bank in Nicosia, the level of knowledge is guaranteed to be at the same level. It's the same content, etc. At the same time, if somebody is graduating from the University of Nicosia in risk management, or somebody from the University of London risk management, the level of education or the knowledge is not going to be guaranteed to be the same, because different courses, different instructors, different infrastructures, different settings. I think that a couple of things, basically, in terms of going back to the skills gap, and I think that universities have a chance to evolve if they evolve faster, and while they're providing a well-rounded education, manage to do more targeted practical things, and also partner with local corporations and employers. In terms of employers, they need to go back to the basics and design learning tracks for their employees, not just hire them and expect them to perform, but also design learning tracks for them. That's it.
So much. That was really, really interesting. And as I said in the chat, my own son is doing a professional qualification from home for the Institute of Management Accountancy. And he's able to do that because he's done he was home educated, and he's a really self-managed learner, so he's just taken that on himself and he's doing it from home. Great. Okay, so thank you so much, Marios. That was really interesting. I'm going to whiz on to Yakov. I'm sorry we're overrunning, but as I said before, it's all so interesting. Yakov, are you there? Hello?
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Oh, there you are. Hi. Right, I'll tell you what I've got for you. I've got that you are an Israeli educator and a worldwide pioneer of democratic education. And in 1987, you founded the first school in the world called a democratic school. And that in 1993, you convened the first International Democratic Education Conference. And you have close links with Jerry, who's coming next after you. So I'm sure whatever you miss, Jerry will fill in the gaps, and we'll all be golden then. Okay, fire away. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. You're on mute, Yakov. You've managed to mute yourself for some reason.
Okay, so I want to change a little bit the format, and I will like to begin to hear you. Everyone is here. You understand, I am from the field of democratic education. I work in democratic school all over the world. It's very interesting me to hear your question. And then if I have time, I will talk a little bit. To do this, I invite everyone to open the windows that we see one another, and everyone welcome to ask question, or if you want to say insight that you have until now in what you're hearing, focusing about democratic education, you're welcome.
Okay, if we can keep it to the time as much as possible, though, and there are some people on here who wish to remain anonymous, so they may not wish to appear on camera. Okay, if that's okay, yeah, and whatever, but what anybody's comfortable with.
I invite. I don't. Yeah.
There's a question from Michelle in the chat. She said, "What is a democratic education?"
Good question. Another question you have? And you're welcome to say the question. It's okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm actually one of the organizers for the event, but I think it's one of the questions I get asked the most is, what is a democratic education when I talk about democratic schools? So I wanted to put that to you as a main, I think that's probably something a lot of people are going to be wondering.
Okay. So let's begin about what is democratic education, because I think it's a very, very important question. Why is it an important question? Because when I built the first school that I call it democratic school, most of the people around me begin to ask me, why you call it democratic school? Maybe all the schools in democratic countries, they are democratic schools. What's the difference? Why you call it democratic school? So most of the schools in democratic countries, they are not democratic schools. I will say why they are not democratic schools, what it means democratic school. If we think about the last 100 years, more and more countries begin to call themselves democratic countries. But they do something that all the democratic countries done. They adapt the same system of education that prepare people to live in dictatorship. So think about the old traditional school, that someone tell you what to do, how to do it, and check you if you've done it. When you are 4-year-old until you are 18 years old. And then when you are 18, they tell you, now choose your life. What does it mean? How I can choose my life? You prepare me to do what someone tell me to do. You don't prepare us to run as a democratic society, as a democratic culture. And that's the idea of what we are doing in democratic school. I will show you, a short presentation, 1 minute. So what we say, that we think democracy need to come to be part of the education system. And it's not by you do the child that is 4-year-old, that is citizen of the country. You build a small ecosystem that you call it a school, and there you give him more and more rights and tools how to be a democratic citizen. That's the reason that we think that the democratic school is the missing piece of the puzzle of democracy at all. And that's not what I say. It's John Dewey say democracy has to be born every generation from the beginning, and the education is the midwife. So we think that at school you need to live the democracy, not study about democracy. That was the first school that I founded in Israel. And then we built IDEC, the International Democratic School. And this is IDEC that we do every year in different places. IDEC is the International Democratic Conference that every year happened in another country. And today we have more than 3,000 democratic schools in more than 70 countries. And it's really celebrate. And if we think about what is the common between all these 3,000 democratic schools, the common is that, first of all, every democratic school is different. Every democratic school is different. And but if you look about what is similar in all the democratic school, I think that you can find these 4 points that come back in most of the democratic school. One is that we run the school democratically. We make decisions together. We keep the decision. We make committees that run the school. So the school, you can see a picture of the parliament meeting in Hadera Democratic School. And the second thing that you can find in all the democratic school is self-direct learning. The children, we believe people is different. And if they are different, everyone have a different learning plan. So every student choose what to learn, how to learn, with whom to learn. We don't have 2 different learning plans. We don't have 2 similar learning plans in the same school. So every student learn differently, and it's connect to what Albert Einstein say, that everybody is a genius. Or if I say it, everyone brings something unique to the world. And we believe in democratic school all over the world, that we don't need to see who is the best. And it's not important who is the best in something one. We want to find what the uniqueness of everyone that bring to the world. And that's, we use the term different is beautiful. To do this, we cannot use the old traditional school that get money from government or for parents and running the school that the teacher teach student. We have a new kind of alternative energy that come to the school. And in democratic school, we say that everyone is a teacher and everyone is a student. And we are a learning community that together we're going to learn things. Another very important point in democratic school is dialogue-based relationship. So we have a very close relationship between adults and students. In most of the democratic school, the student choose one of the adults to be his mentor. So it's not, you don't come to the school, the teacher classroom. The teacher, you choose the teacher that you want to be close to him. And the last thing that we are doing in most of the democratic school, we are teach the content from the student learn the content from the point of view of human rights. So in most of the countries, you learn everything from the point of view of your nationality, the history of your nationality, the geographic of your nationality. We are looking about everything from the point of view of human rights. And today, of course, we use a lot the 17 sustainable goal of the United Nations. And we believe that that's make the world much safer and hope that it's bring peace to everyone. Okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. That was so interesting. And I did the 17 sustainable goals. I have to say that it's something that I've introduced. I'm a Girl Scout leader, Girl Guide leader, and it's one of the things that I'm really strong on when I'm talking to my girls, that you know, those 17 goals are really, really important. So I really feel what you're saying.
And
So
I will say that it's because we are internationally, it's very interesting to learn the 70 goals, but when one school is in Japan and another school is in the United States and another school in China. It's the interesting.
yeah, the interpretation can be very different. Okay, so Jerry, could I ask you a favor? Could you let Wendy slide her 5 minutes in before you come in? Because she's going to have to go because she's not feeling terrifically well. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That would be great. Okay, go for it, Wendy. I know you're only going to take 5 minutes.
What I'm going to talk about really comes down to basics of what you might want to do in Cyprus. How do we support home education? How do we help home educating parents?
Wendy, just before you start,
Yep.
so sorry, I meant to say introduce yourself, but it's okay, I'll introduce you very quickly. You're the chair of Education Otherwise, which is a very large support organisation for home education in the UK, well established. You home educated both your children and your grandchildren, and you're a member of the government COVID expert witness panel in respect of elective home education, and you're a retired legal professional.
That's me in a nutshell. We could say a lot more, but that's the nutshell. Anyway, as I was saying, home education is a minority choice, and as a result of that, quite often parents are worried about quite basic aspects of what is involved. On our helpline at Education Otherwise, parents will call in and they'll apologise because the questions they're asking are pretty basic, but there's never ever a need to apologise or to think that a question is too insignificant, because supporting home educating families means welcoming any questions that parents have. Any questions that they have are important for us to help with. One of the first things you have to consider is what is the law relating to home education where you live. Now, numerous nations around the globe accept home education, but each has its own set of rules and regulations. Some even ban home education. Right now, you are not legally really in a position to home educate in Cyprus. And where you start depends on what the situation is where you live. It might be that you have to group together to form a mutual support organisation to lobby to legalise home education, as in Cyprus. Go from the start, or you may simply have to familiarise yourself with the law. It's not unknown, and I know we have an example of this amongst the people here, for families to relocate internationally simply to be able to home educate because it's what's best for their child. Any home education organisation, even a small one that's just starting like in Cyprus, can be invaluable as you can circulate information that's accurate, supportive, and helps to band people together to achieve what you want to achieve. Another really common question we get is, how do our children access examinations? And interestingly, in many nations, home educated children do not have to take exams. In the UK, you don't have to take exams. And where they do have to take exams, mostly examination centres, which are often schools, are welcoming of those children as external candidates to take exams. Because really, why would you not welcome them when we all value qualifications, as an earlier speaker said? And home educated children don't take a tranche of exams at one time. For example, I'll refer to the UK again. In the UK, children tend to take a range of 6 to 10 GCSEs at age 15 to 16. It's not necessary. It's not unknown for home educated children to take those exams at age 7 or as old as in their 20s or 30s. My own mum did it in her 50s. What matters is that it's the right choice for the child at the right time for the child, and that is a huge value of home education. Groups can help with this by collating and keeping lists of where exams can be taken, what exams can be taken and how, because that is a concern that will always need alleviating. But the biggest question we get asked by those outside home education, and it's usually in this tone of voice, yeah, but what about socialisation, in a critical way? And there is a perception amongst some sectors of the public that home educated children are kept in cupboards. They're certainly not socialised. Well, I've searched my house before we started this conference and I didn't find a single child in any of my cupboards. I was a little disappointed because I might use another one here and there, but they weren't. They're not hidden from the world. Nothing could be further from the truth, nothing. International research finds home educated children to enjoy a wide range of social opportunity, and parents can help this. Groups like the tiny emerging groups in Cyprus can help this. You get together, you arrange local groups, you arrange events for your children, you will arrange joint learning, outings. All things can be educational. Take a child to a beach and you've got weeks and weeks of learning from just a few grains of sand. As a geologist in another life, whilst educating, that is something I have done. It works. Get together, create those opportunities by supporting each other. Another question people ask is, what about special needs children? And when you look at the numbers of children being home educated in a lot of countries, that sector of the community is rising. In the UK, it's because special educational needs is very poorly supported in school. I should have said are very poorly supported, I apologise. So as a parent, you are the expert in your child. No other person is the expert in your child. You are. So your child will learn from you because you have an interest of your child. You want them to have the best possible future. You want them to achieve their potential, whatever that potential will be. And whilst there might be just a few children whose needs are so complex that they do need to be in specialist care, for most special needs children, being at home and learning at home is beneficial. It simply works. And one of the things that is good for parents to get together with is joining in groups so that you can support each other. You simply know that you're not alone. The very last question I'm going to cover is, what does it cost? And the answer to that is however much you want to spend. I've personally home educated a child through several years for a few £100s in total. I've had another one, a grandchild, that cost me many thousands of pounds. So I'll leave you with the thought of much material is now online, it's free, resources can be shared, parents can join together to learn from each other. Just don't do what I did, just don't, whatever you do, agree to your child having flying lessons. And I hope that's helpful.
That's great. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you very, very much indeed. Jerry.
I'm going to have to leave you. Thank you.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, so Jerry. Oh, there you are. Jerry, I last saw you in a house in Gloucestershire where we made fish pie together. I don't know whether you remember that.
When was this?
You came over and Mary Lou was there as well.
Was this at Albert's house?
Yes.
Oh, okay, of course, yeah.
It's a few years ago now. Right, I'll let you get on if that's okay. So I've got you down as being a leading voice in the alternative school movement for over 30 years, and that you've been both a public and independent alternative school principal and teacher, and have helped found many public and private alternative schools and organisations. And in 1989, you founded the Alternative Education Resource Organisation, which really is a global resource organisation that has communication and conferences and all sorts of things. So that's really great. Okay.
Okay, so I see that my time is up. Are there any questions?
Sorry. Topic so
Actually,
good.
well, I do totally agree with Yakov, and I actually had that down in my notes before he said that, which is, you know, I'm really uncomfortable with just saying, oh, here I am, a fountain of knowledge. I'm going to tell you what I have, you know. But so I'd be very interested in questions that people do have. I actually had one for Yakov, but I'll deal with that later if I can. I do have one question to start with, though. First, what is the law about home education in Cyprus? Can you answer that?
Currently, school is compulsory, and rather than in like in the UK, education is compulsory, whereas in Cyprus and in Germany, school is compulsory. So that's where we're at the moment.
So then home education would technically be illegal?
That's correct.
Have people been brought to court?
I think some people have been prosecuted. It's certainly been very difficult. There are people who have done it in the past and got away with it, but only because they've been in hiding.
And how about starting a new school? Would it be hard to start an alternative school there?
Ooh, Michelle, are you there?
Hi, Jerry. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, we're not that crystal clear at the moment. This is one of the difficulties we have in trying to get, clear, straightforward answers. There is a Montessori and a Waldorf school in Cyprus, but only for primary school level, so not high school or above. And but they have to follow national curriculum. So it's not exactly a self-directed learning approach. Now,
a Montessori school would have to follow national curriculum?
Yes, any school setting at the moment in Cyprus must follow their curriculum. That is our understanding. Home education is not legal. The only way a parent can home educate in Cyprus is if their child has been diagnosed with some kind of learning difficulty or learning disability or other disability, and they cannot attend a physical building. But if the Ministry of Education gives permission, then they will send one of their own teachers to the house to then educate the child. So it's not home education as we practice and understand it. So it's quite, at the moment it's mainly school is compulsory. So we are hoping for some meetings with the Ministry of Education in this month or next, so that we can get more clarity and so that we can see a way forward. To answer your other question about court, yes, we are aware of one family at least that has been taken to court. But that's the only one I know of personally, being involved for a few years now, but yeah.
So here's a related question. If somebody is registered in a school outside of Cyprus for distance learning, is that legal?
Well, as far as we're told, again, we can't get clear answers. This is one of our problems. That's why we're asking for the physical meeting with the ministry to ascertain exactly what parents are allowed to do. I mean, we know of parents whose children are following an online school from other countries, but whether they actually have permission to do so or not, it isn't clear. When I inquired some time ago about moving back to Cyprus, I live in the UK, so that I can legally unschool my children. But when I inquired, every time I inquired, the answer was, no matter where you're from, no matter your nationality, no matter your background, if you're in Cyprus more than something like 6 months of the year, you are considered a resident and your children must attend a school. So in Cyprus. that is what I understood, which is what's kept me in the UK. So hopefully we can get more clarity when we get a meeting and can get some more sort of clearer answers really of what the situation is. But definitely it's not allowed or legal to home educate in the way we hope we can, like unschooling, homeschooling.
Alice, you've got your hand up. Could you want to come in very briefly?
Alison joined us. Fantastic.
Yeah. Do you want to speak very briefly, Alice?
Yeah, basically, hi, good evening all. I don't know if you can see me, I don't see myself. Basically, Michelle covered it. There are several cases of parents who have managed to do underground this homeschooling thing, and including parents who have had their kids enrolled in either umbrella schooling or some other forms of alternative education, schooling, I don't know how to call it, the system, let's say. And when they were caught, they went to court. I know several cases in Paphos, Limassol, and Nicosia. So basically, no, nothing is permitted here. Everything that doesn't have to do with compulsory presence in school is considered illegal. There's, so far that I know, there's only one case of, I heard there is a second one, but I don't know the person, in Cyprus with special needs kids, a terrible condition and physically unable to be moved from the house. It's the only two cases that got allowance, if you may say, from the Minister of Education to be homeschooled with a weekly visit from some sort of inspector from the Ministry of Education.
So it sounds like there's one area that's still fuzzy that could be pursued, and that is enrolling a child in an umbrella school. For example, there's Global Village School, globalvillageschool.org in California. That's a legal school, and you can graduate from it. So the question to pose to the authorities there is, can I register in that school? Or there's several others we can tell you about. So that is a key question, because if you can, then you can homeschool through them. And they have people all over the world. Global Village School has people who've done that all over the world. It really depends on what the laws are where you are. Anyway, so you can see what my general approach is here, which is I'm learner-centered. I believe in learner-centered education. And I really don't, I could go on for hours, days, you know, to talk about things that I know about, but I want to know what people need. And that's what I want to provide as much as possible. One thing I want to point out is the education revolution has happened. Our website is educationrevolution.org. And so people can check out the website, educationrevolution.org, and we have 600 schools that are members around the world. There's a list of 200 that are democratic. There's a list of 100 that we helped to start. And we have a course that we offer every year to help people start new alternatives. Part of that course is to get the answers to legal questions like these. People have to know those answers before they can proceed. Anyway,
well, we hope Jerry, to be able to do that, since now we have a bigger community of parents to support this.
Yeah. So
whereas the previous cases, they didn't have much of support. They were like basically single cases, so they run everything on their own.
Right. So anyway, anybody has specific questions for me, they can just email me at jerryarrow@aol.com. I'll put it in the chat. And they can also go to educationrevolution.org. You can write to me from there too, if you have questions. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I could talk about, but I'm not going to, because in the time that we have, it's more important to figure out what the direction is for people where you are.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions related to that? I've just about used my time up.
I'd just like to say, Jerry, that I think you're a brilliant resource for this, because you've been there and done it in so many different places and so many different countries, and so it's really good to just kind of pick your brains about this stuff, really. And the thing is, as Alice has said, so Alice and Michelle are the two people who've organised this conference and asked me to chair it, and Alice lives in Cyprus. And this is the big change this year. The big change is that they have pulled together. The community has started to pull together, and with bigger numbers and more of a pulling together and more cooperation comes the ability to change things. And so
things are changing around the whole world because of the COVID accidental thing that made everyone a homeschooler for a while. People now know, hey, I don't have to just send my kid to the local school.
Absolutely, 100%. So I think things are changing. People are looking at home education in a different light, to a certain extent, seeing it as more of a possibility as a mainstream option. Lots of governments don't like it, but if we can paint the advantages that Sean has talked about, that Joanna has talked about, etc., the things about special needs, all the rest of it, and about producing a more sustainable, diverse, flexible nation, especially in a small country like Cyprus, where they have a brain drain, they have very limited opportunities from an employment point of view, and a lot of that is because of the lack of ability to have creativity within the country, because of the lack of flexibility. Michelle, you have your hand up.
It's just a quick correction. One of our listeners, Evie after Hugh, corrected me. Sorry, I stand corrected. She said the Montessori school in Cyprus follows a Montessori curriculum, not the national curriculum, which is approved after 4 years by the ministry. So I just wanted to add that, because we were under the understanding that they also had to follow a national curriculum.
Okay.
So it's good to know. Obviously, that's one thing that's helpful.
This is very important, because you need to realize that Maria Montessori was very radical. And there's nothing, for example, about democratic education that is really antithetical to Montessori. And so you can call, one of the ways possibly that you could go is call yourself a Montessori school or a Montessori inspired school, and you might have more leeway.
Okay. So anybody's free to contact Jerry, or they can bring their questions to Michelle and Alice, and then Alice and Michelle can take those questions and collate them and send them off to Jerry. Jerry, yeah. Sorry, Alice, is that you?
Alice, yeah, I need to intervene here and to add something on Montessori. Montessori has its own curriculum. We might have this wrong. The thing is that Montessori was incorporated under the umbrella of a private school. The problem with that is that it's a bit inaccessible financially. So it might be a form of alternative education, but not a form of alternative education that will cover for everyone.
There are
I mean, like low budget people. So
there's such a thing as public Montessoris in the United States and in other places. So they're not necessarily private, but also as a private school, you can do what we do in my school starters course. So they are not elitist. You have a sliding scale tuition. People pay what they can afford. So for example, if you look at Brooklyn Free School in Brooklyn, New York, you'll see that it has more minority kids than anything else. That's because of the sliding scale, but it's a private school.
Yeah, Montessori in Cyprus, it's a good thing that finally happened something, but it is inaccessible for most of the people economically, and it doesn't serve the age. It has an age limitation because it's only primary school, so it doesn't have it for
schools. Montessori schools go through high school. Just because they're
not in Cyprus, not in Cyprus. They are legalized up to for the junior school.
Yeah, does that mean it's not possible to do that? That's the
Yeah,
question.
it's not impossible. This is what we try to take it from there.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
several schools in the United States that are Montessori that go through high school.
Okay, so basically things can change, things can adapt, and we've got some little chinks in the armor already, like the Montessori primary school and other things, and we just need to work on those little chinks and broaden them. Jerry, thank you so much. Are you hanging around for a bit?
I will try to.
Thank you so much. Andrula, are you there?
Hi, yes, I am.
Hello.
Nice to meet you all. Hi.
Hi. We are overrunning rather massively, I'm afraid.
Don't worry, no problem.
But so I'm going to go straight through. So apologies for not having that quick comfort break. I'm sure anybody can dash off if they need to, because we are recording this, and so we'll be able to accommodate that, and they can watch any bits that they missed. Now then, so Andrula, I have you down as being you're legally trained in the UK, I believe.
Yes, I'm from the UK as well. So grew up in the UK. Father is Cypriot, so moved to Cyprus when I was 18, and then went back to study for another 7 years. So yeah, now live in Cyprus. I'm the director of the European Legal Training Centre out here, and I've been in education, legal education, for the last 12 years, and I'm also an advocate as well out here, so licensed barrister solicitor, as we would call it in the UK.
Okay. So if you can briefly tell us how anybody can access legal careers through a non-traditional route, that would be absolutely marvelous. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll go away now.
So in general, as a company, as a training centre in Cyprus, we're quite passionate about ensuring that people are able to access the legal profession. The legal profession not just being an advocate, but also accessing from the bottom up. We have a lot of people come to us in Cyprus who've been through that traditional education that you have been talking about, that some people don't fit into that mold of traditional education here in Cyprus, but they have no other choices. So they have to finish school, and maybe they finish school with not the best grade. They can't access the best universities, and because a lot of our students go abroad, England, different European countries, America, to study, which is a massive drain on parents' finances. So we have a pocket of people here who always wanted to be in the legal profession and couldn't get there, either financial or because they didn't fit into that system. So what we do is, and we generally advise quite a few people, that the best thing to do is to enter the profession at a legal secretary stage, work yourself up to a paralegal, and then from being a paralegal, there are plenty, well, there used to only be 1 or 2 law degrees that were online. It was places like the University of Law, University of London, and I was teaching the University of London at a registered teaching centre for 7 years. And now, because of the COVID pandemic, so many more universities are opening up to online education. So we say you can, it didn't work out then, and because in Cyprus, like you have just been saying, there are no other options at the moment for someone who is under the age of 18, but perhaps we can provide that option after 18, where they can work at the same time, gain valuable work experience, and also be ahead of the game. A lot of students come out here and they from America, the UK, Germany, all these countries come here and they know nothing about practicing law, but they have an academic qualification. Whereas we say, if you're working as a paralegal, you're working in these law firms, you will have all of that work experience. And at the same time, we can help you and teach you to be self-taught, self-driven. We can teach you to be organized. All those skills that a lot of the speakers today have talked about are the benefits of home learning. It's just a shame that those benefits really in Cyprus at the moment can happen after the age of 18. So yeah, that's what we try and do. We try and help people access the legal profession in the non-traditional, I went to school, got an abolidirion, or I got an A-level and I got A's and I got a 17 or 18 and above in my abolidirion, and I have parents to pay for me. We're trying to provide another option, another road for people, which in the end can actually end up being more beneficial. So I've tried to keep it as short as possible because I know the time. So yeah, that's it for us.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. And if you can hang around for a bit afterwards, then we can have a bit of a Q&A if you've got time.
Yeah, sure.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Right, Blake, where are you? I've lost you. Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Hello again.
Hello again. I'd like to share a screen if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right, can you see it?
Yeah, yep,
Good.
Yep.
Thanks. I'm mostly familiar with the United States. I'm mostly familiar with the unschooling world, but I'm very excited about seeing self-directed learning options proliferate throughout the world. And so I want to talk about all the interesting stuff that's happening in the US, so that in Cyprus or elsewhere, just have an idea of what's possible. And I only joined recently when Jerry was finishing up. And so if I'm overlapping with something that was already said, pardon me. So
okay, Blake,
yeah.
I didn't introduce you because you're the founder of the Unschooling Adventures, and you're the author of Why Are You Still Sending Your Kids to School? And you live in California, I believe, and you're a California native, and you do lots of traveling. So that's you in a nutshell, isn't it?
That's perfect, Alison. Thanks. I jumped the gun. Okay, so in the US, we've got everything from conventional schools to totally radical schools and home-based options. And I know families that are dedicated unschoolers from the day that their kids are born, and those kids still end up going back to conventional school because it fits their needs for whatever reason, sometimes social needs, sometimes academic or sports needs. And so I consider that part of the spectrum of options, even for totally radical families. We also have easy ways to do college level work earlier. And so community colleges, I've realized, are something that are pretty unique to the US, and I hope spread far and wide. They're very inexpensive. They're very accessible. The farthest you can go with a degree is 2 years, but a lot of homeschoolers and unschoolers will just sign up for local community college classes, taking 1 or 2 based upon their interests and earning college credits. And it's very easy to do that starting at age 16, but you can definitely do it at an earlier age too. There are lots of what I would call vaguely alternative schools or progressive schools. And so Montessori, Waldorf, Reggio. There's also a lot of public schools that attempt to do some sort of hybrid alternative. And these seem to be the forms of alternative education that are most, you're most likely to find almost anywhere in the world. But let's move on, because the more interesting stuff is yet to come. Homeschooling, getting banned in France, or at least you have to have a special application to do it. The homeschooling laws in the US are this fantastic historical byproduct of the Christian right partnering up with the crunchy liberal left, because they pretty much want the same thing. Go figure. That all happened in the 70s and the 80s. And so we have these very liberal homeschooling laws that allow us to do almost anything we want. It depends on what state you're in, but big states like California and Texas, you can do almost anything as a homeschooler. It's crazy. And so that lets us do interesting things like microschooling, in which families will hire like a teacher or tutor just for their specific group of kids. And so it's like very niche academic or non-academic opportunities. World schooling, there are families that are traveling around the United States and traveling around the world that are legally homeschoolers in some state in the United States, but they are out there on a bike, or they're out there in a recreational vehicle, or they are just traveling in some other unique way, maybe on donkey. And then, of course, unschooling is the field that I'm most passionate about, because it's essentially using self-directed learning, combining it with homeschooling laws to have a completely individualized education. Finally, self-directed learning centers, these are like for families who don't want to just do home-based education or home-based unschooling. They still want community for their kids. They want other adults around. I think pretty much everyone wants that, but some kids really want it or need it. Self-directed learning centers are what makes unschooling possible in a physical environment of other kids and non-parental adults. And in the US, I see three major movements happening. There's the Liberated Learners Centers, which are mostly teenagers. And it's essentially unschooling. It's, there are very few requirements placed on a young person in one of these centers. They're largely on the East Coast of the US, but the founders of that network, Ken Danford and Joel Hammond, are very open to helping liberated learner centers start up anywhere in the world. They recently helped one start up in the Philippines. There are also the, oh my gosh, I can't even see this anymore. Sudbury and other democratic free school models, which are pretty well known thanks to the Sudbury Valley School books and democratic education principles in general. And finally, the Agile Learning Centers, which has a very big international contingent, as far as I can tell, especially in Mexico and other parts of Latin America and increasingly in Europe. And so these are great terms to Google to find different kind of frameworks or modalities for approaching very autonomous self-directed learning, things that are a lot like unschooling, but are done in a community environment. That's what we've got going on in the US. It's a great time to be a self-directed learner in the United States and increasingly abroad. Ta-da.
That's amazing, Blake. Fantastic. So, yeah, that's quite it's interesting how much your list gels with Joe's list. Joe, are you there? Joe.
Yeah.
No, she's not. Joe Merritt, where are you? She's disappeared. No, she disappeared. So she came up with a list. She came up with a list that was pretty similar to that with the approaches. So that
Sorry,
was.
I'm here. My screen froze.
There she
Hello.
is. What are you like? So how similar is your list?
Yeah, mine is really similar. It's quite nice to see in a way. There's a sense of synthesis going on, I think, worldwide with these movements that we see in the UK, but we're also seeing worldwide these movements towards focusing on children as the ones who are creating their education and the parents as the ones who are just trying to help them forward with that. And I think it's brilliant, I think the way the world is going, we're going to see more of this, especially as we know from some of the other talks today, that in terms of what we know about the future, we know from climate change there's going to be mass migration, there's going to be people who just can't attend a physical school, there's going to be problems that we can't even predict, and all of this kind of hybrid learning, this learning that's focused on interest and individuals and personalization. I think that is the way that we're going to have to educate. So we're all in the front running for this, which is brilliant.
So what I'd like to do at this point is I'd really like to bring in Anne. Hello, Anne. Are you there? But she is there somewhere. I know she's there. I can see her. There she is. She's on mute.
I am there. Sorry, I was halfway through messaging another participant because we were setting up a virtual coffee. So it's all going well for the networking.
So Anne, I just want to introduce you because you are, you're a friend of mine. You're also a trustee of CPE, but you're a home educated grown up, aren't you?
Yes. Do you want me to do my bit now?
Yeah, go on, do your bit.
Yeah. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And it's lovely to meet new friends from all over the world. So I'm based in the UK. I am very nearly 38 and I've never, ever been to school. So I'll do the very quick intro, but really I know that we've got lots of people on here who might just have questions about that. So, I thought it'd be more fun to do it as more of a Q&A. But what happened for us was that I was born in September. Both my parents are teachers, which is why I was born in September, because they know that September children in the UK tend to do a bit better. And my sister is 18 months younger than me. So back in the 1980s, children didn't tend to go to school until they were 5, and I would have been quite an old 5-year-old. So my parents had a look at the local schools, and they started looking around when I was 2 or 3, just to kind of give themselves some time to have a think. And the local primary school that was down the road from us had the red table and the blue table and the green table. And my mum was like, well, I was 2.5, 3, and like most 3-year-olds, I could already do red, blue and green. You don't have to be that clever to be able to do your colours at such a young age. And she thought, well, this isn't really going to work, because by the time she goes to school and is 5, she'll be well beyond doing colours, and she won't be very interested in if that's all they're offering. And also because my sister was so close to me in age, she didn't want my sister to miss out on rhyme time at the library or whatever, because she was having to race back to pick me up from school. So my mum thought she was inventing home education, and she thought, well, in other countries in Europe, children often don't go to school until they're 7, so we'll just home educate, we'll just stay at home, we'll just carry on with doing what we're already doing until they're 7. And then a few weeks later, she was talking to someone and found out that home education existed, and there was the organisation Education Otherwise, and she joined that. And then, of course, we all got to 7, and mum said the best advice she had was to take it 1 year at a time. So we got to 7 and we were having a lovely time, and mum thought, well, we'll carry on for another year, and then we'll carry on for another year, and we'll carry on for another year. And, so it goes on. The more you have nothing to do with the school system, the less you want to do with it. My sister and I were both dragged around various school open days at various points, just so that, as my mum said, we couldn't turn around and say that we had no opportunity to engage with school. But obviously we were already having so much fun, had so many friends of different ages, were active in our local communities, learning all the time. Why would you want to stop doing that and having such a rich social and educational experience, and then hide away from the world for most of your waking hours doing stuff that's not particularly interesting? So yes, school was always there as an option. We chose not to use it. My sister chose to go to sixth form, which is the 16 to 18-year-old provision. She chose to do that partly, I think, out of some curiosity. And the head teacher phoned her up and offered her a job as soon as she left the school. So that and said that they'd learned a lot from her in how they approach doing things. And I kind of did the usual sort of thing, that I chose to do some exams. I spread them out. I started doing my first public examinations at aged 13, did 1 or 2 a year. And then my career has been in broadcasting. So I work in radio. So that's a kind of a creative industry where your experience is what counts. So I've made programs for the BBC. I worked for the BBC for 12 years. I was a producer, an online and radio producer, specialised in children's programmes for some of that time, made programmes for the World Service, made programmes for national radio, local radio, and then also moved into doing technology work. So I made an unusual shift in my career to do broadcast engineering and technology. And then I left the UK, left the BBC, went to work in New Zealand, managed to talk my way into a job teaching on the National Diploma in Journalism, teaching journalism. And then I also ended up going in and out of South Sudan, training producers and broadcast engineers and developing some programs for the National Diploma in Journalism there. And have been running my own company and being freelance for the last few years, and have clients all over the world. So in non-pandemic times, I'm normally traveling all over the world to do stuff in various radio studios and speak at conferences. And I also run a big industry event in the UK as well. So it's a wonderful mixture. And then I have a whole parallel side career. So my main career is radio, and then I just have like this side interest in birth education, and I'm a baby wearing consultant, and I hang out with lots of doulas and things like that, and then do stuff like being a CPE trustee. And we're currently setting up a legal-based organisation in the UK as well to specialise in home education law and defending the right to home educate in the UK, because it's a bit under threat. So anyway, that's me in a nutshell. But I really thought if people had questions about what it's like to have been home educated, then please ask me anything. I've probably I'm used to the questions.
I tell you what's really amazing. I'm thinking of you and Blake, and both of you do an awful lot of traveling. That's really fascinating. You know, he's really
pandemics suck for that.
Doesn't it just? Doesn't it just? Blake, have you got any questions, Fram?
No, but always happy to meet another traveler. And I did get to travel during the pandemic. I snuck myself into Germany via the UK.
I can't get into Germany to see my in-laws. That's not good. Right. Okay. Jerry, did you have a question?
Yeah. Did you ever wish that you'd had a regular education and then wanted to become a doctor?
Want to become a doctor? Well, if I'd wanted to become a doctor, I would have studied for it and done it. I mean,
interested in birthing and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, but you know, if I so let's say, you know, I did consider midwifery quite seriously, and I would have reasonable amounts of experience for being able to do that and to apply. I expect they'd probably want me to have more recent biology study, so then I'd just do that as an evening course or something, you know, do the thing. I mean, you know, it's not like you have to make a decision when you're 13 and then that's the end of your life, is it? I mean, you just crack on with it.
And of course, that's a big point. And a lot of people don't understand that there's more flexibility in the system than you realize. And also that colleges really don't care anymore if you have a diploma, because they want us. They want homeschoolers. They want people who went to democratic schools and all that, because they have a track record now of not having been ruined in terms of their interest in learning.
Well, I think a lot of it as well is about experience, isn't it? So if you know that you're passionate about becoming a doctor, of course, you're going to look up all of the formal things you might need to do, because I'm totally fine with the idea that you're not allowed to do surgery on someone until you've proved, you know, it's fine that you can't just fly a commercial plane autonomously. It's okay to have some training sometimes. That's okay. But I think, yeah, if you are passionate about that, so people who want to become doctors are probably already doing things like volunteering with their local St. John Ambulance or Red Cross and learning about first aid, or perhaps they're volunteering with the local Meals on Wheels service to support elder care. You know, there's all that kind of stuff. And if you've not got the hassle of having school get in the way of lots of your useful waking hours, you can go off and do all of those things that actually are relevant and follow your interests. And that means that when you come to apply, you will come having had 5, 6, 7 years practical experience of volunteering in your chosen area, as well as whatever the pieces of paper are that you bring as well. So yeah.
So I have a question, Anne. Do you think that having that flexible, more child-led, because your education was quite child-led, wasn't it? Up to well, it was child-led. You decided what you were going to do, really, didn't you? Pretty much. Well,
yeah, I think it's quite interesting because Mum and I now sort of say, I think if we had our time again, we, you know, everything we did was right at the time. If we had our time again, we do stuff differently. So we didn't have a formal timetable or anything like that, but we did have like maths workbooks, or maths for the Americans, that we worked through. And I think that if we had our time again, we wouldn't have done that, because it sort of made mathematics seem like this separate thing that wasn't that interesting. So yes, I think the more child-led, the better. Of course, some children need and want a more formal and timetable-based approach, and that's fine. But I think if a child is choosing it, then that's the most important thing.
Yeah, horses for courses. But do you think that flexibility and that self-management and that self-direction, do you think that's made you more entrepreneurial and more open-minded and more willing to try new things as an adult than you might have otherwise been if you'd been at school?
Yeah, I think not having the creativity knocked out of you and not having the curiosity taken away from you is really important, because I have seen a lot of children who are hoppity skippity kind of 4-year-olds who are then dead behind the eyes at 6. And that's, but you know, and that is distressing, you know, because you can see the change in them. There's something about their spirit that's gone. And I think that is the worst. That is up there with the worst violations you can.
It certainly is. Jerry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that maybe people don't realize that it's possible to have a school that has an unschooling philosophy.
I don't think it is. I think that that's a daft idea. I'm
that-
sorry, like,
Well,
it's like the whole trying to put a philosophy onto, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff in the alternative schools movement that's just trying to put a different grid onto, you know, it's a differently shaped grid onto people, and it's probably a better one than the conventional model. But yeah, I think you can have clubs and societies that say, this is what we're going to do. I did a lot of stuff in guiding, so Girl Scouting for the Americans, you know, joined lots of organizations and had a really rich experience through those. And obviously there were all things that I chose to do, and we had a whole variety of stuff. But I think that sometimes people spend a lot of time trying to reform the system when they could just have it much less complicated and just go, what do you follow your child's lead and then get out their way, is what I usually say.
Getting back to Cyprus, see, that's why I was thinking, okay, so maybe you affiliate with Global Village School or something like that, but you actually have this freedom and you have a group that comes together regularly and all that. For example, in my school had no set curriculum, zero. People would come in the morning, any student or adult would announce any class they were interested in doing or having. And for example, one day a boy came in and he said he wanted to learn how to become a pilot.
Brilliant.
So we said, okay, everybody's interested in Danny's pilot class, get in the van. So we got in the van and said, okay, where should we go? Well, let's go to the airport. So we went to the airport and we asked them, you know, how do you become a pilot? And they said, oh, well, just go next door. They do some training. So we went over there and we saw them and we told them what we wanted, and a guy had just come in, and the guy there said, oh, why don't you show them your cockpit? So we went out and we were looking at the cockpit, and then the guy comes out and says, why don't you take them for a spin? We wound up flying over our school from that morning of the kid saying he was interested in being a pilot. Now, I don't think that could happen in most normal schools.
No, that sounds amazing. I think nowadays that couldn't happen because of all the paperwork you have to fill in anyway. But that's the kind of thing, is it? It's that learning how to kind of do a flirty blag, you know? So you get very good at just being interested and saying to people, oh, well, you know, we've got people on this call who are lawyers, got a legal background. So then you already go, oh, actually, I'd like to have a chat to you. Or I've now got a friend in America and I'm going to be in your neighborhood. Can I come and have a cup of coffee? All of that is the sort of skill that I think you develop from quite a young age if you're home educated. And partly, this is one of the things around the constant questions about social life. I have a theory that the fact that you stick out a bit and you will have adults asking you about your social life once a day, every day for 12 years in a row on average, you get used to talking to people from a variety of backgrounds very quickly. So I think there is something in that sort of sticking out a bit that means that you just have to learn to crack on with things.
Of course, homeschoolers call socialization the S word.
Yes.
And it's hilarious, actually, because if you think about it, kids in regular public school are being socialized to a situation that they will never experience again in their lives. They will never be in a room with 30 or so other people their exact same age.
Exactly. It's such a false.
Never going to happen again. So homeschoolers, meanwhile, are interacting with people in everyday life. They're totally socialized compared to the other kids who can't even, in some cases, look an adult in the eye. And
that's absolutely true, Jerry. The only other two places where you might be surrounded by people the same age as you are prison or the army, really, I suppose. And we know both of those aren't particularly healthy.
Well, the school to prison pipeline is probably another topic. But for the people in Cyprus, you know, I do know people who have home educated there. But the fact that you effectively are in a situation where your government's saying that parents aren't allowed to parent, you know, that's really frightening. And so kind of lots of love and solidarity to you. And if there's stuff that we can do in the UK to help, then, you know, we are, because we're having to fight at the moment. Our laws at the moment are pretty good in the UK, but we're trying to keep them that way because there are a lot of moves to try and stop people being able to choose what works for them and their child and tailor it over time, and to kind of restrict that and make it much more like school at home is the only option, and that's not good.
Yeah, and unlike the United States, I mean, Blake was very interesting when he said that the laws around home education in the United States are sort of centered on this blend of the religious right and also the more liberal, sort of more hippie-ish type people, I suppose, if you want to put it like that. But we don't have that in the UK. In the UK, very much religion is not part of home education in most circumstances. It is a minute part of home education. We don't have a large body of creationists, for example, in the UK. So we don't have a large body of people who have
problems with science.
Yeah, well, deeply held religious views.
Deeply held religious beliefs, yes.
That conflict with modern education. So we don't have that drive here, and we view. And somebody said in the chat earlier about they were quite worried about the United Nations sustainability goals being involved in education. And my comment to that is it's all about interpretation. If you go with the spirit of those goals, as I believe the spirit of most of those goals are, that they are made generally by good people to ensure that people have better chances in life, then going with the spirit of them means that they can be used as a positive. But you can twist them and you can use them as a negative. And like I said in the chat, education, primary or elementary education is something that has been said to be really important worldwide, that everybody should be able to learn to read and write, etc. But some countries interpret that as making school compulsory, and other countries interpret that as making education compulsory. So it's down to interpretation. It's down to us to be good.
In the international rights of the child, the UN, it says they have the right to compulsory education. That's part of that. But I think that there's a reason for that. And as you say, it's subject to interpretation. But that's one reason people feel iffy about that statement. And I had a couple of things to add to what people said before. In Germany, I think that one of the reasons why home education is not legal is there's a big component of people from the Christian right. And some people there are worried about that beginning to dominate if they allowed home education. So is there any connection to that and say religious people in Cyprus? Because I'm just curious.
I think in Cyprus we might have the opposite issue in that the church and religious teachings are within the main curriculum. So that's something that they have to learn about in the normal public school setting. Perhaps one of the main concerns might be that might be missing from home education, especially with the younger generation, that won't be taught. So I think that could be a problem.
I missed that. What won't be taught?
That the religious element, that the Greek Orthodox Christianity won't be taught in home education. So I think that could be a roadblock for education being, for someone being able to be homeschooled in Cyprus.
Then it's quite similar.
So the church would probably not like the idea of us being outside of mainstream education because we won't have that religious education. That could be an issue out here.
One thing I wanted to say to Blake is I think you should have thrown Summerhill into the mix because that was the inspiration for a lot of the others, including Sudbury.
Yes, it's just not in the United States. And I wish there was more Summerhills. I really wish there was more overnight self-directed learning, boarding school type programs.
It doesn't matter if it's in the United States. It inspired a lot of what's on that list.
Yeah, completely. Agreed.
And of course, it's still going. Some people think it closed a long time ago, but it's still very much alive and probably as good as it's ever been. You're muted.
Alison, you're on mute. Love.
When I was down in the house in Gloucestershire where I met Jerry a few years ago making fish pie, we were in the house of two people who had met at Summerhill, were we not?
That's right. They were both students at Summerhill, Albert Lamb and Popsy, his wife. And he had been, not only that, he had been a staff member there, a house parent, and his kids went there to Summerhill.
Yeah, and they'd been together at school, and then they'd lost touch with each other, and they met completely by chance, didn't they? On a boat or something, and then they'd left both of their partners and they got married. It's like a romance novel.
Yeah, and it continues.
And I think that also brings something back to the UK. Obviously, we have so many different people in the UK who home educate because it's so flexible. So we have a lot of people who maybe their child encountered bullying at school, or people who've had children with special educational needs who deregister from school, or something's gone wrong at school and people have deregistered, or people during COVID have gone, oh, this is much more fun, and then have then deregistered. But we also have people who do it from the start, and we're now starting to get in the modern era of home education in the UK, which sort of, home education has been part of the UK society for since time began, but the sort of the modern area where ordinary people who weren't the aristocracy do it, it's been going for about 60 years. But we're starting to get second and third generation now home educating families. So it's a very small number, but there are some for whom it's kind of being home educated is also a cultural identity as well. And that's going to be really interesting to see how that sort of progresses, because it makes all the stuff that's going on at the moment about it doesn't work and it's not valid. You've been saying those arguments for the last 30, 40, 50 years, and now we're kind of coming around with the next generation. So this is just nonsense, the gaslighting that comes from the authorities about the outcomes, when it's perfectly obvious that if you just, so long as you surround children with love and access to knowing how to look things up, then it's very hard to do a worse job than school.
I think one of the secrets to Summerhill's success and continuation is it's being directed by A.S. Neal's daughter, who grew up at Summerhill, and then her children were also educated at Summerhill and will take over. Technically, people might not know this, but Summerhill belongs to the Neal family. And it may be another reason why some board didn't change it or close it down a long time ago.
No, that's a very good point. Michelle's got a couple of questions actually. Michelle, do you want to come? Do you want to jump on board here?
Hi. Do you want me to?
Michelle.
I'm here.
Hiya.
Hi. Hiya. Do you want me to ask the questions that were put by others, or do you mean my questions?
Well, the other questions. There was a question to Yakov
from Sean,
who's not here anymore.
Okay.
Both of the questions were to Yakov, but Jerry might be able to answer some of these actually. So, what do we think gave Yakov or anybody the idea that schools needed to be democratic, and how are the UN global goals and perspective positive rather than negative?
So again, just what's the question?
Right. So the first question is where did the idea that schools need to be democratic come from?
Well, I think only Yakov can answer that question. Where that idea came from. The concept of democratic education was there before he started his school. Obviously, Summerhill started in 1921, but what he claims is that his was the first school to be named a democratic school. But of course, he knew about the concept well before that. So that would probably be part of the answer to that question. There was more to it. What was the other one?
Okay. Well, before we get into that, what gave A.S. Neal the idea that democracy in school was important then?
Oh, I can answer that too. See, A.S. Neal learned from Homer Lane. And Homer Lane had started something called the Little Commonwealth. And it was technically a reformatory and in England. And it ran democratically. And so he, Neil learned from Homer Lane about that whole idea of how to do things like that. And Homer Lane tells a great story that illustrates that. So they went to court, and this boy was being remanded to his custody, you know. And so they went to the judge's chambers, and the boy expected to be, you know, taken away in handcuffs and so on. And Lane says to him, he's with his mother, he says, okay, young man, take your mother home. Here's some money. I want you, you can come, if you want to come to us, there's a train that comes at this time. We'll meet that train if you come to that. And otherwise you'll have to make your way there. And the kid's attitude, you could watch it changing, he said. As he talked to him, he sort of looked proud and took his mother and said, come on, Mom. And of course he showed up. And so Neil told this story to a friend of his who was a public school teacher, or not Neil, Lane. And the teacher said, oh, well, you certainly have a power over children. And he said, no, you didn't get the point of my story at all. The whole thing is not about, it's the real authority. Love is the real authority. And if the more you try to practice power, the more you are unsuccessful.
That's very interesting. So the other part of that was really about Antonius was saying that he liked the idea of democratic school, but the idea of the UN global goals and perspectives being involved was worrying to him. And I think I partially answered that with saying that it's down to interpretation. Do you have an opinion on that, Jerry?
Me? No, I just agree with you. I have always found that a little iffy, some of that concept. But I think what's important is not following anybody's particular prescription, but understanding that kids are natural learners. If you understand that, you can't do stuff the other way, period, end of story. The more you do it, the more you destroy the natural ability to learn.
Yeah, very, very true. Michelle, you had a question for Harriet.
Yeah, I had a question and then one for Jerry as well. Harriet, I wanted to ask, I unschooled my children. Well, I didn't do anything. My children have been unschooled for the last 10 years or something like that. My younger two learned to read when they were about 7, naturally, mainly because they wanted to play Minecraft. That was their motivation to learn to read. And it just happened within weeks, all by themselves. However, I've also heard of many children, especially in alternative schools, that don't learn to read until they're about 12 or 13. And so my question is, what is it in a child's brain that suddenly unlocks and makes it possible to then suddenly decode language or be able to pick up naturally without intervention?
Well, if they live in the real world, then of course it'll come along that there's a need. And then when there's a need, they'll learn. And if they haven't been forced to learn, they can learn at lightning speed. For example, I had a kid who was unschooling and working as an intern for us at our office. And he learned what he wanted to. He became a very good musician, even toured Europe and all that. That's what he wanted to do. But he never learned algebra. And he decided at one point he wanted to go to college. And part of the test that he needed to take to get in included algebra. So what did he do? He taught himself algebra in a week, aced the test, even taught other people. And so now we have a ratio of 52 to 1, you know? How fast can you learn what you want to learn? So that's the answer. Another answer to that is interesting. There was something called the modern school started by Francisco Ferrer. Has anyone ever heard of it?
Yeah.
So the modern school was started in Spain by Ferrer. And I first heard about it from a 93-year-old woman who was 96-year-old woman. She was 96 at the time in 1989, who had been a teacher at a modern school. And her son had been a student. And she tells the story about how her son was never interested in learning how to read. And then At one point, when he was about 10 years old, he went to his mother and asked her to buy him a particular book that he wanted to have. And she said, "Why should I buy you a book? You don't know how to read." And he said, "I'll learn how to read that book." And so he eventually became a renowned pediatrician, got a scholarship to Columbia Medical School, and other similar stories. At least 3 other people that I've met there that didn't learn to read till they were 9 or 10.
If I can just sort of pop in with my kind of family, very, very intensive academic study of a family with 2 children in it. So obviously that's absolutely valid. Isn't that right, Joe and Harriet? That's definitely academically valid. But so in our household, obviously 18 months apart from my sister, brought up with same parents, very similar style, very similar access to books. I was what would be called an early reader. So, 3.5, 4, definitely by 4 I was reading. I remember desperately in those little books that you get that are like reading scheme books that are very dull, but the first page is notes to parents. And I can desperately remember trying to struggle through the notes to parents in the very small text because I was like, what don't they want us to know? And yet my sister, she wasn't really reading until 8 or 9. It later turned she's dyslexic, so she didn't need to be dyslexic until she was older, and then she got a free computer out of being dyslexic at university. But exactly the same access to books. My mum did say at the time that she was sort of very glad that it was that way round, because she knew that if she held her nerve, her children would read, and it's just more reassuring when you've got one already doing it. But it is totally normal for children to start to learn to read between 2.5, 3 and kind of 8, 9, 10, without there being anything, so long as they've got access to books and encouragement and they're living in a society that's using text. It's just in the school system, because you've got 1 adult and 30 children, you have to get them reading by 5 or 6, because it's logistically impossible to keep everyone together if you've got a class with 8 and 9-year-olds and some of them can't read and some of them can. A lot of children still miss out on it. I've come across tons of children who are 12, 13, 14, gone to senior school and they can't read, and that displays in bad behavior. Behaviors communication, because they're trying to cover the fact that they can't read because they've it's not been noticed. But it isn't really something to panic about if you're at home, if your child's not reading and they're 8 or 9, so long as you're still reading bedtime stories and helping them, writing, shopping, all of the stuff, you're not just like locking them in the cupboard and not giving them any exposure to books. But it's totally normal. It's just how children develop. Some children are more interested in learning other skills first, and it makes sense to their own brains. So
that's true. Joe's got a point to make. Joe.
Yeah, I think what we know from the research is that reading is actually like any other developmental stage in children. So we don't put when children learn to read, it's, when children learn to walk or when they learn to talk, we do have a rough guideline of when we expect that to happen. But actually, we often see that the children do that on their own when they're ready. They pick up their cues from their environment and from their carers and their parents. And so all these other steps that children take, from sitting up on their own, taking their first steps and beginning to talk, they do them all at what's developmentally right for that child. And I think reading and writing actually isn't too different from that, but we have this distinct pressure from schools for children to have to do those things very early, when actually developmentally some children might not be ready to do it at such a young age.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah,
There's an analogue with maths as well. My specialism is in maths as my teacher training, and what I realised is that actually what's valuable in maths, what most people think of as maths, is process-based maths. So where you're writing down 1 + 1 = 2, whereas actually what's really important when learning maths is developing a complex framework of understanding of mathematics, and that happens through real life experiences and having emotional connections to mathematics, which very rarely happens in school, which is why you get so many people who think they're bad at maths and they are not bad at maths. They've had bad experiences of what they've been told is maths. My daughter went to school for the first time when she was 8. She was only in school for a year, and when she first went, she really struggled with maths initially. Within a year, she was top of her class, which is a horrible term, but that's how they classed her. And the teacher was absolutely befuddled. She couldn't understand why this had happened. And I said, no, it actually makes perfect sense, because when she came in, she wasn't struggling with mathematical concepts. She was struggling with the formal representation of it, which is the writing down of maths. So actually what she'd been building all of her life up until when she went to school was this complex framework of mathematical understanding. But as soon as she got her head around the writing bit of it, which actually is the easy bit if you're old enough to learn it. So if you are old enough to understand, if your brain is developed enough to do the writing bit, then you get it really quickly. But if you try to teach it when they're really little, it can often be really hard and actually puts lots of people off mathematics. So there's huge analogues there between maths and English, or maths and writing and reading, sorry.
Just to interject as well, because I did maths teacher training as well, and one of the things that we were taught, and that I truly believe, is that children have to learn to be comfortable with number. They have to learn to be comfortable with manipulating numbers. That things like playing with buttons are really important. You know, sorting things, putting them in colour order, putting them in size order, putting them in different grids so that you can see that 3 times 4 is the same as 2 times 6. All of that manipulation and using what we call manipulatives is really, really important. And they have reduced and reduced and reduced the use of manipulatives in primary school in the UK, which is and the quality of primary maths teaching is abysmal, absolutely abysmal. And I come, even my girl guides who come to me at 10 years old, I have ended up tutoring some of them in maths because their maths is appalling and they are petrified of number. Jo.
I think this, the stuff you're talking about now, for me as a researcher, I see this, and Jerry can correct me if I'm wrong, but this kind of upside down learning, if you like, where children learn the concepts, they learn the real life experience of what maths is or what language is, and this upside down learning where they learn the bigger concepts first, to me is what I see from my perspective, what underpins all of these self-directed learning, democratic learning. It's about understanding the world first before you learn the steps to break it down. Whereas we do the very opposite in school. We tend to learn the steps to something and build up to the concept. And I think that's, for me, that's how I see it as something, the difference. Doesn't matter what style of alternative education you do. The difference is that you have this kind of opposite version of school. So we don't learn incrementally like we do in school, and then you build up to the bigger picture. The alternative education scene, whether that's self-directed learning places, the Sudburys or the Gardens or the home education, it's about learning through life, through experience, through practical hands-on learning about the bigger concepts before you then can break it down.
I wouldn't, maybe that's so, but I would put it more basically that it's just children reacting to the need, whatever they have in their environment, and then they'll learn what they need to learn. I gotta go pretty soon. I've got lots of things to do today. Gotta put out another newsletter. I hope everybody is subscribed to our newsletter. If not, go to educationrevolution.org. It's a free weekly e-newsletter. And you can sign up for it on any page of our website. And again, let people know if they're interested in starting a school. Let them know that we help people do that with our online course. And that starts the 20th of this month.
We'll post about that on our social media.
Okay, because we will help anybody, and if they can't afford the full cost, we have various kinds of things we can arrange. We don't want to exclude people, especially from developing countries. We want to make sure that they can get help in starting their alternative. So goodbye, everybody. Nice meeting you all. Nice talking to you.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think Blake's gone as well.
I go too.
Yeah. Well, I think we're winding up now. I think we managed to catch up with the delay fairly well.
Yeah.
I
So can I just say, so one of the things that Jerry mentioned earlier was the concept of love, and I think that that's such an important concept in our movement. And I think fundamentally there's some people in the world who have a fundamental faith in human nature, and some people who don't. And so in many ways, like, we're part of like sort of an eternal struggle against totalitarianism, really, and against this kind of idea that human beings need to be controlled in order to be good people. And that feels like it's really central to a lot of things that we're doing. It feels very sort of, yeah, very, very political in many ways. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, alternative education just is political, isn't it? You know? Yeah. Sean, have you got anything to say? You've been very quiet.
Yeah, well, most of that was when I was eating my pizza earlier. So, I'm struck by some of the very recent comments, because in UK schools, the philosophy at the minute seems to be based on basically brain chemistry and plasticity. And there's an idea that you have to spend 10,000 hours practicing something before you become proficient in it. And this comes from Malcolm Gladwell, ultimately. But that means that every spare second in school must be used efficiently, because otherwise you might not get your 10,000 hours in. And there's a belief that certain things won't become embedded. So these are foundational skills, but the problem is that by the time you've done 10,000 hours of forced activity, you will not want to do it anymore. You know, the example I would offer is that Nelson Mandela, when he was imprisoned, he had to work in a lime quarry. He spent 10,000 hours digging lime. You know, he didn't go on to become a sculptor. So I think that is the long-term problem in our schools. There's a belief that it's popular with parents. You have the magic trick of teaching children how to read and write very, very early, which you've also told parents that, you know, that's impossible unless a teacher is doing it. And then we push them through a system that's based entirely on conformity and obedience. And in this context now of 10,000 hours, I see a disaster coming up in about 10 years. And I believe teachers know it, and I think that the backlash is already beginning in terms of discontent. And we will see it come through in a 5 to 10 year window.
It's very interesting. All the lovely participants we have out there that are still with us. There's a few left. Has anybody got any questions? No? Resounding silence. Alice, do you have anything else you want to say? Artemis, go on.
Yeah, to expand on what you were saying, Sean, like, I think really, like, so in the UK we have the opposite of our movement. In there are some mainstream schools who were inspired by the Michaela School, who are extremely coercive and extremely authoritarian. And what I really hope is happening is that, because there's lots of research into alternatives, and what I really hope is happening is that somebody is tracking what's happening to the long-term experiences, and particularly mental health, of those young people who are exposed to these coercive environments. So they're saying, yes, all these young people, we can get them loads of GCSEs, but then what happens after that? Because we know from the experiences of some places where they have hot housed young people that they might well get through the exams, but then after that they can't actually function in society very well because their mental health is so poor. So there's no point in getting really brilliant exams and doing absolutely fantastically, like, academically, whilst you're in this coercive environment, if you can't function in society afterwards. I mean, it's you know, so I really hope that someone is also tracking what's happening to the opposite end of the scale, just to compare that.
But you do wonder, with any narrow provision, so for example in Cyprus with them, they've got quite a rigid curriculum, and you know, there's religion plays a part of it, and school is compulsory, and you wonder, you know, I mean, certainly in the UK, that beam that the children have to walk along to get educated has got narrower and narrower and narrower over the last 20 years, and they fall off the sides of it much more easily. They fall off the sides of it because the classes are too big. They fall off the sides of it because if they don't hit the targets when they're supposed to hit them, they get left behind. They fall off the sides of it because everything you do now is pivotal on learning to read first, and if you don't manage that, you're stuffed, because everything else you have to read in order to do it. You know, I've had girls around here, guides around here, who've come around to try and do their homework with me. I had a 12-year-old. All she needed to do was look up volcano on Wikipedia. She couldn't even do that. She'd been left so far behind, you know. I mean, she's got special needs, but she didn't need to be in that place. And we're just failing children all the time. And then one of the unfortunate things that happens in the UK now, and this will happen in Cyprus if they bring in alternative education, is that when they fall off that narrow beam, the parents pick up the slack, and then the authorities come in and say, but your child hasn't learned to read, and you have no defense, because your defense is, my child couldn't read when they left school at 9 years old, we're not there yet. And they say, yes, but you failed, put the child back into school. And it just ends up being a ridiculous, punishing, punitive cycle where learning should be exactly what Artemis says, joyful and really enriching and colourful, and all of those things. And we miss out on that because we've made it so rigid and so narrow, and that beam is so narrow that it's become almost like the gymnast beam. It's so narrow, 1 foot wide.
There's also another point I want to make about that in my experience, because we started with our oldest being in school, so he went through kind of primary school till age 8, and we pulled him out because of bullying. And then the other two tried school twice, didn't like it, but I gave them the opportunity because I wanted them to own their decision. But the thing I noticed the most was the I don't know how to describe it, was the connection in our family, that we reconnected as a family, and we saw our children thrive in being in the environment of the real world, not being separate from us for 8 hours a day, then having to somehow communicate what they've done, what they need to do, and us not having any idea what they've been doing for 8 hours a day. So, but the thing is that, and I go back to Artemis's point of love, I think children in a healthy family setting, they thrive because they surrounded by love. Everything we do is out of a place of love for them, and out of a place of real, genuine wanting to nurture them to spread their wings and fly. We have the best interest, that we're the most invested in that, aren't we? So it's natural to see your children just thrive and develop all these beautiful skills and really flourish. So for me, that's been the biggest thing I've taken, is just seeing how, I mean, even like so many people keep going on about teenagers and having this, oh my gosh, what's the word in English? You know, when they're going through their hormone changes, pre-puberty and puberty, and oh, it's natural for them to be moody, and all. We haven't really experienced all those things. And I mean, some things, of course, but not to the extent of what I hear. And I think it's partly because of the communication in the family, the nurturing environment, that they have the safe space, they're being heard. We are a very democratic family, so they all have equal say and decision making. And so I think those things are missed, you know, when we talk about alternative education. They're very important things, because that's what sets them up for life outside the home eventually, or whatever they decide to do, you know.
Yeah, I completely agree, Michelle. I work with teenagers, and I absolutely love working with teenagers. They are just, it's so it's so great hearing what they have to say and their perspective on life, and this perception of teenagers as being sort of moody and just, you know, difficult and rebellious. It's just not my experience of teenagers. Like when you actually give them power over their lives, like that's not, that's like, it's not like, you know, brain surgery. Like if you give people autonomy over their lives, they are not going to be grumpy. Like if you exclude people from society, and if you exclude people from, you know, having agency in society, of course they are going to not care about society, and they are going to kick against it because there's no space for them.
If we separate them from society and community, and everything is micromanaged, it's like Sean touched on that several times about, you know, everything is dictated for them, everything is decided for them. They have no ownership in anything, including in the home often. So they come from school where everything is, they're told what to think, what to believe, what to learn, how to learn it, what to play, how to play, whom to play with. Everything is micromanaged for years and years and years. Then they go home and they have often family micromanaging them because of the stress that's in, you know, have you done this? Have you done your homework? You need to study, get off the screens, da 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 da. And so it's no wonder, for me, I see that rising in mental health issues in children and teenagers. And I think it's then we're not letting them breathe. We're not letting them speak. We're not letting them think or express. And then it's like, oh, teenagers, they're so disconnected. Yeah, because we're not connecting with them in community. I see people cross the roads when they see my teen, you know, and he's like the loveliest kid ever, but it's the perception, isn't it? It's that fear, if they see their hood on, whatever. No one takes time to talk to them and get to know them. And so we create this disconnection, and then we wonder why, what's gone wrong. So I don't understand why we don't ask those questions to the education system, really, you know? We're not holding them accountable. The education system, I mean.
If I could just add one other thing, which may be maybe a suggestion for people in Cyprus who are not necessarily going to try and change the law on home education, but perhaps they'd like to set up a school which had a different character to that of mainstream. So cooperative schools, they exist in the UK, but generally speaking, the cooperation that happens is cooperation between the schools, the sharing of resources. What's completely missing in those environments is cooperation between the teachers and the children, so that the children are considered to be partners in the cooperative. And it's the same with the parents. The parents largely are expected to deliver their children to the school and then go away.
Yeah.
But a genuine cooperative would be one in which the children and the parents and the teachers were all seen as partners in this joint endeavor, and they would be able to set priorities for themselves as to what they learned, how they learned it, how they functioned as a society within that school. And there's obviously great potential there to do things quite differently to the way it is done at the minute. And really, it's very hard to argue against cooperatives anywhere in Europe at the present time, because there is widespread acceptance of devolving power down to the lowest level. There are councils all across Europe which describe themselves as cooperative, and trade unions and people like that still run their own education establishments. So it may be that could be a stepping stone, you know, to ask, can we set up a cooperative school?
Yeah.
And give it a character that shows the benefits.
That's a great point. We've got somebody who made a comment on what I was saying earlier. The thing is that a single mother working 5 to 9 is really challenging to spend time with your kiddo. I hear you. I get that too. And actually, I mean, I run a business from home and I'm studying as a mature student. So I'm not necessarily available all the time. And I think there's a misconception. People think if you're home educating, you're home all the time or present or available. It isn't that. Even if you're working all day, it's how you use the time when you are around with your child. So often you'll see like a parent will come home from work and it's, have you done this? Have you done that? Where's this? Why have you not eaten? Where have you done? Where are your dishes? Why are your dishes there? Why is your room dirty? Have you done your homework? Have you, you know, and it's all blah, 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 blah. and very little connecting time. So I think it's not about how much time we have with our kids, it's about how we use the time with them. So I hear that my husband works 2 jobs. Today he left the house at 8, he won't be home till midnight. And still when he's home, it's not about criticism or asking them if they've done this, it's about connecting, it's time talking. He'll take him for a coffee, or he'll sit in the garden, tell me about what's on your mind, let's, that kind of stuff. So I think it's how we use the time with them. It doesn't mean we have to be available. I mean, it's not possible. I'm not, we juggle it all the time. It's definitely challenging, but it's how we use our time with them.
Absolutely. Artemis, you had your hand up. That's going to have to be the last comment because we're out of time.
We've done amazing. We've done really well.
I try and keep it as quick as I can. But you said that was a huge motivation for me when I was setting up the garden. And I thought I really want all the good things about home education, of which there are so, as we've heard tonight, there are so many things. But I also really wanted them to have like a collective experience, and some experience slightly separate from me, and have this community and somewhere I could not be as well. I am most of the time, but like potentially could be without me. And what we find is that allows people to home educate. So they are at home most of the time, or with their families most of the time, but they come to us for some portion of the week in order to have some time with other young people and with other adults who are not their parents. Sorry, that's my dog. And that was a huge, I think that makes a massive difference, and that actually allows many single parents particularly to be able to home educate.
Yeah.
Or to at least alternatively educate or do something different, because it's kind of misnamed. What happens with you, it's kind of misnamed, and it's just because it's legally home education that we have to call it home education in a way. Right, I'm going to wrap things up. I'm going to stop the recording right now. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we will put this recording up on the CPE YouTube channel, definitely. And we'll try and include as many links to presentations as possible. So thank you very much.